So let's move forward. So folks, welcome to the April meeting of the Ottawa Centre RASC. Special welcome to those from other RASC centres and those who are visiting us as visitors. So welcome to our April 9th meeting. Next slide, please. A couple of security things on Zoom. We are in webinar mode, which is reasonably safe, but a couple of things to be careful of. Do not click on any web links that might appear in the chat or the Q&A windows. As panelists, we're not going to be putting anything in those windows, and those could be suspicious links. Please do not raise your hand. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box, not the chat box. That's the way we will send the questions to the presenters. And what will happen is I'm monitoring that box, and at an appropriate time, I will interrupt the presenter and present the questions. Okay, next slide, please. So as the Royal Astronomical Society, we remember this evening the husband of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, who passed away earlier today. We hold Her Majesty and the rest of the royal family in our thoughts and prayers at this difficult time. I would ask that you would, if you could stand if you're able, and observe 1 minute of silence in honor of Prince Philip. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. So welcome to the meeting this evening. My name is Dave Chisholm. I'm the meeting chair. So here is the agenda for tonight's program. I've got the Ottawa skies for April. We have members in the news as well just before that. Bob Olson is going to be doing a presentation on disasters and imaging. That never happens. Pierre Martin, overview of 2021's top meteor showers. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then we're really pleased to have Dr. Jayanne English talking to us about the CHANG-ES survey. We have observations and announcements. Welcome to the new members who have joined the RASC Ottawa Centre. We have 5 new members in the last month and 18 so far in 2021. Members in the news. So congratulations to Jim Thompson, who has his picture published in the May 2021 Sky and Telescope, the waning crescent moon. There's a bigger picture of it. So that's great, thank you. And he also had an award, Best Picture of the Week, back in November 20th, 2020 in Sky News. Okay, so let's take a look at the Ottawa skies for the month of April. First of all, the moon phases. On April 27th is the full moon, and this full moon was known by the early Indigenous peoples as the pink moon because it marked the appearance of the moss pink or wild ground phlox, which is one of the first spring flowers. It has also been known as the sprouting grass moon, the growing moon, and the egg moon. Coastal tribes called it the fish moon because this was a time when the shad swam upstream to spawn. This is also the first of 3 supermoons for 2021. The moon will be near its closest approach to Earth and may look slightly larger and brighter than usual. We have the Lyrd's meteor shower this month, conveniently washed out by almost a full moon, April 22nd and 23rd. And I'm going to let Pierre is going to be talking about the upcoming meteor shower, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but best viewing is after midnight. Next slide. Because our next meeting appears after this date, I'm also going to talk about the Aquarius meteor shower, May 6th and 7th. We have Comet Atlas, and it's not that bright a comet, but it's certainly visible in the morning sky. And you need at least a 6-inch telescope to nab that comet. And there's where it's going to be. This is March through April. Sun, obviously the days are getting longer. So here's the sunrise and sunset throughout the month. By the end of the month, it's setting at 8:09. Mercury is not visible. It's too close to the sun this month. Venus is visible just after sunset toward the end of the month, and Mars is visible in the evening all month. Jupiter is visible before sunrise, second half of the month. And Saturn is visible just before sunrise as well. Uranus is visible in the early evening, first half of the month, and Neptune is visible before sunrise in the later part of the month. There's our cartoon of the month. Okay, thank you very much, folks. We'll move on then. And just to let you know that I'm taking bookings for an interactive introduction to astronomy. I mostly do guides and scouts, but I do other groups as well. I did 3 sessions for the Ottawa Public Library last month, and just contact me at meetingchair@ottawa.rasc.ca, and I'd be happy to put on a presentation for you. There's one for beavers and sparks, the 5 to 7-year-olds, and another one for the older groups and the adults, which was about an hour and 15 long. Then as a follow-up to that program, I actually have a second astronomy presentation that I do. It takes about an hour and 15 minutes. And I'm continually tweaking this one. I've added black holes to it because I seem to be getting lots of questions about those as well. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Olson here. Just let me remove my spotlight and bring him up on the spotlight. There we go. There's never been any disasters in images, right, Bob?
None. Doing astrophotography can be expensive. When you include the price of telescope, the mount, the camera, the focuser, the guide camera, the filter wheel, the specialized software, and the computer to run it all, it can add up to a substantial amount. I would guess the number would be in the thousands of dollars, and for some crazy people, possibly tens of thousands of dollars. If you spend all this money, you sure want the experience to go smoothly. Well, I wish you luck. My equipment was all purchased secondhand or is homemade. This reduces my costs, but means my equipment is often out of date before I even start. And used equipment is certainly more likely to break down than brand new. Next slide, please. I think, yes. Tonight, I'm going to show you some imaging failures that I've experienced. I've been imaging for more than 20 years, so I have lots of failures to use as examples. I have been out imaging over 50 times this year alone, so I don't have to go far back to come up with lots of mistakes. All the examples tonight have occurred in the last 2 months. So for the non-imagers in the audience, this will be a list of things that we rarely show you. For imagers in the audience, maybe my errors will make you feel better when something goes wrong for you. And for the beginner imagers, I remind you to try your best and have fun doing it. Nobody ever started out taking great images at the beginning, and some of us still don't. Next slide. So many things go wrong in imaging that I had some trouble deciding the order in which to present them. I will start from the most expensive and head toward the trivial. The observant of you will instantly see the problem in this setup. Next slide, please. I use a computer-controlled telescope, but the program needs to know what time it is and where it is located. Otherwise, it will have no idea where to point. Granted, the planetarium program is supposed to default to now and to where I live, but it often starts wherever it wants. This is usually after an update to Windows. If I forget to check, I can get into trouble. When I first started imaging, I did not have a go-to scope. It seemed to me that I was spending more time finding the target than I was imaging it. My targets are often very faint, and you have no idea how many times I took pictures of empty star fields. If the computer loses contact with the telescope mount through a software or hardware glitch, the telescope will continue to track until it hits something. This is usually the Pierre. When I say the telescope will crash into the Pierre, I must tell you this is not a high-speed crash as it rotates once a day. The scope or mount might sustain a small scratch or dent. This is not the expensive part. The real problem is the wires that connect to the mount to the telescope. As the mount continues to rotate past the horizontal, these wires get wound up and stretched. The mount will stop rotating when it hits the Pierre, but if the wires are stretched too far before this happens, there can be trouble. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the mount controller. Basically, this contains the brains that controls the telescope's position. I have owned this mount for 15 years, and with new mounts, this controller is now at version 4. Mine is version 2. When astrophysics upgraded from version 3 to 4, many version 3 owners purchased the new version. This meant there were secondhand version 3s available for sale. The price was generally about $300 American. When compared to the $1,100 price new, it seemed like a bargain. When I approached Ginny with the idea of upgrading to version 3, she asked, "What's the advantage of version 3?" When I told her it was version 3 instead of 2 and was thus intrinsically better, she was not impressed. So I made up a bunch of technical gobbledygook and was allowed to spend the money. Next slide, please. When the mount rotates too far, this wire gets stretched. And when the wire is 15 years old, it can be brittle. Also, frigid winter temperatures don't help with wire flexibility. 2 of the strands in this cable shorted, and by the time I got to the telescope, the controller was hot. Hot electronics is never a good sign. I replaced this $200 cable, but the damage was done and the controller was dead. Fortunately, as Ginny had already pointed out, there's little difference between my new burned up version 3 and my old perfectly good version 2 controller. If I had been forced to replace both the controller and the cable, the price for new would have been about $1,300 American, which is about 200,000 Canadian. Next slide. As you can see, I'm sorry. This is a classic case of closing the barn door after the horses escaped. I built myself a limit switch for my telescope mount. If the scope rotates beyond the horizon, this switch cuts off power to the telescope. This stops the scope's downward spiral to death, but it also ends my imaging session. If I want to continue imaging, I have to be paying attention. Next slide. The heart of my imaging setup is a program called MaximDL. This program is sold by an Ottawa company called Diffraction Limited. The owner, Doug George, is a longtime Ottawa RASC member, and if you read the articles about the history of our FLO observatory in astronauts, you will often see his name. This program controls my camera and helps me calibrate and stack the resulting images. One of the interesting and useful features of this program is its ability to rank your images. It uses 2 characteristics, the first being the size of the star images, and the second being how round the stars are. This slide shows an unsatisfactory image and a list of images to be stacked into the final image. The little red crosses indicate unsatisfactory images. Next slide, please. As you can see in this image, Maxim is suggesting that 22 of my 73 images taken are not up to snuff. That's a 30% rejection rate. This is not a normal rejection rate. The wind was blowing and the clouds were skidding across the sky. On a good night, most images would be fine, but on a normal night, I think I probably lose 1 image in 5. The Maxim DL program, by the way, costs between $200 and $500 US, depending on the version you buy. Next slide. This is an example of a fairly good single 10-minute image of the Sunflower Galaxy. The stars are reasonably small and round. The sky was clear, not much wind, and no clouds. Next slide. This is an example of an image taken a short time later. It seems to be missing the bottom half of the picture, possibly the roof of a nearby house. Next slide. Unfortunately not. This is a shutter failure in my camera. Next slide. This is what the shutter of my camera looks like. You can see 2 stainless steel blades that open and close to let light into the sensor or block it. This shutter mechanism sits right in front of the CCD sensor of my camera. A while back, my sensor got some dust specks on it, so I decided to disassemble my camera and clean the sensor. I had done this many times before. This time, though, I had a stroke of genius, and I removed the shutter mechanism so that I could have better access to the sensor. As I removed the shutter, it slipped from my fingers and spun toward the floor. One of the blades flew open and cushioned the mechanism as it smacked into the floor. The unfortunate side effect was the shutter blade was crumpled. I flattened it as best I could, reassembled the camera, and found it worked. But every once in a while, it would stick and the image would be ruined. The obvious solution is to replace the shutter blade with a new one. The problem is I have been imaging so long that most of my equipment is obsolete and the parts are no longer available. I contacted the manufacturer of my camera and they confirmed this to be true. Since this image was taken, I have disassembled my shutter mechanism again and hammered the shutter a little flatter. It has not failed since, so wish me luck. Next image. The most common cause of image failure is clouds. Next image. And the heavier the clouds, the more obvious the failure. Next slide. If the clouds are exactly the right brightness, they show up all the dirt and dust on the sensor. Next slide. The next best way to ruin an image is to not focus the telescope properly. Focusing is way more difficult than you can imagine. The image is typically very faint and the atmosphere is constantly in motion. So stars come into focus and go out of focus continuously. Many telescopes change focus as they change position in the sky. Most telescopes change focus as the temperature changes. My camera uses colored filters and each filter has a different focus position. I use computer-controlled focus, so an image this bad is some kind of failure. The most likely causes are wind, clouds, or trees. If this talk were being given by someone else, I would also suggest operator error as a possibility. Next slide. Satellite tracks are a minor annoyance rather than a complete failure of an image, as the stacking software can mostly deal with them. Next slide. This image is a combination of all the satellite tracks on my Sunflower Galaxy. The big track through the heart of the galaxy was probably not used, but the software eliminated the rest. Next slide. Most of the time, I would just attribute this track to a satellite, but I think it is actually a meteor track. The image is less than a degree across, so this is a very short track. How appropriate is it that Pierre is one of the speakers tonight? Next slide. Tracking is one of the biggest hurdles that beginner imagers face. Next slide. As you can see from this blow up, the star images are lines rather than a point. This can happen for many reasons, but if your equipment is running correctly, the most likely cause is the wind. Next slide. As you can see from this image of my scope, It is the size of a garbage can. Next image. So it acts just like a sail in the wind. The wind blows, catches the sail, moves the scope, gives me streaky stars. Next slide. I actually have two cameras on my telescope. One is capturing the image that I want, and the other is centered on a guide star. This guide image is sent to my computer with the instruction to keep the star in the middle of the box. My computer will sample the image every few seconds, calculate the center, and send move commands to my telescope to recenter the star if it has wandered. You might be thinking, what a genius I am that I could write a program that could control my telescope like this. Well, I can't, but Doug George can and has. This is all part of his MaximDL program. Next slide. This system of guiding works very well, but it can get fooled. In this case, something jiggled the telescope and the guide camera latched onto a different star. The computer doesn't know what star it's pointing at. It just centers whatever star is in the box. Next image. This image is just a jumbled mess. It is hard to tell anything. Next slide. When you zoom in on a single star, you can see that the guiders seem to latch on to about 7 different stars. I needed to know what would cause this kind of disturbance. Next. To find out what's going on, I set up a trail camera focused on my telescope. Next slide. I live in the country, so there's lots of animals around. I continually hear coyotes, frogs, and owls. I've seen deer, raccoons, squirrels, porcupines, and most fearsome of all, skunks. I'm assuming that this guy was looking for food in my equipment bin. The camera ran most of the night and captured a few other comings and goings. Next slide. Next slide. In a nod to full disclosure, I must admit that part of this slide is faked. That is not a real werewolf, but is in fact my neighbor Tim dressed in a wolf costume. The hard part of setting up this photo was getting the owl and raccoon to stay on the scope while the guy in the wolf suit was standing beside them. As I have mentioned before, I live in the country, so dressing in a wolf costume and sneaking around in the middle of the night is not without risk. If he met a real werewolf, it would end badly as they are very territorial. Next slide. I go back to my photo of the telescope. Notice that 77 pounds of stainless steel sticking out horizontally. I have been known to wander out in the dark to check my scope, forgetting about that counterweight shaft and then crashing into it. This results in some very strange images. Next slide. You have no idea how many astronomy pictures I have taken after sunrise. Sometimes my imaging run just takes longer than I figured, and sometimes I just forgot when sunrise is. Next slide. Have a great day. See you around, folks.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was great. And we do have some questions here. Let me just see. Chuck was asking, can you not Bluetooth those wires rather than having them get tangled up?
Every time I try to increase the technical level of my equipment, I have more failures, not less. The wires are really good. You just have to pay attention. Okay. And Mick Wilson loves your images, would like to put them on the website if that's okay. Sure, go ahead. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna move on. We've now got Pierre Martin. Just a second, I gotta find him here. He was here, there he is. Okay. You should be spotlighted. Whoops. Oh yes, you're sharing your own slides. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, good evening. I'll just get set up here. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Before I begin, I just wanted to comment on Bob's picture, the one with the meteor in the shot. From what I could tell, it looks to me that it was definitely a meteor, especially with the short track that you described. And one of the telltale signs, knowing whether it's a meteor or a satellite, would be to note any coloration difference in the trail. So if you notice that it starts typically green and changes to a yellow tint, that would definitely be a meteor. A satellite would always have typically the same white line across. But I found that even with my photography, my meteor photography, it's become occasionally challenging to determine the difference between a meteor and a satellite. In some cases, I found some of the satellites would line up perfectly with a shower radiant, like the Perseids. And I was like scratching my head. It's like, well, it doesn't quite look like a meteor, but it seems like one. And then I would zoom right into that part of the sky and look at it on my screen. And sure enough, it's a satellite that's pretending to be a meteor. So the brightness variation, and also you typically see a little bit of, well, brightness and color variations along the trail. If you see like little flares, typically that would be a meteor. So yeah, so good evening, everyone. So I'll be talking a little bit about the year's top meteor showers that we have active, and a little bit of an overview on what we can expect. So basically, meteors can be visible on any given night, typically in small numbers. So the vast majority of those that are not associated with a known shower are known as sporadic. I'm sorry, sporadic meteors. And typically on any given night, you might see anywhere from about 5 to 15 per hour. And this hourly rate will vary depending on the time of the year. Typically, you'll see more sporadics during the second half of the year compared to the first half. And there are reasons for that I'll save for a different presentation. But basically, my disclaimer before I begin is that forecasting meteor shower outburst or unusual activity remains still to this day very difficult to do. As far as like the science of trying to predict those intense showers, or the whole thing with this is we're trying to determine the evolution of dust particles throughout the solar system. We cannot see where this dust is. So the only way we can predict possible meteor shower activity or outburst is using computer models. And basically, with the dust coming from a comet, you're seeing on your computer where the comet passes over the sun, releasing millions or even billions of the dust particles, and simulating where those particles are going to be going across the solar system, how the planetary perturbations are going to act on those, and how the solar effect, the solar wind, all the different forces are going to alter the path of those particles and those dust trails. And over time, it'll shift, it'll move slightly differently or in different orbits than compared to where the comet or the parent body was. So this remains difficult, and we're getting better and better at it. And the forecast modelers were able to do a really good job forecasting the Leonids in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we're doing pretty good also with the big showers like the Perseids and such. The main reason for that is that there's a lot of data, a lot of observations over the years, and even over the past decades and centuries. They're able to go through the historical data and then pull those out and compare them with the computer models, which are forecasting as much into the future as they are into the past, to try to confirm, is the model working? Is it matching with the actual historical records and the meteor rates that people were seeing? So we're getting better and better, but the problem is for a lot of these showers, we just don't have enough data, which, as I mentioned in the past, it goes to say that it still remains very important to do observations, to be out there watching the sky, or doing video and photography methods to try to gather more data on activity. So I'll start with the this month with the shower that's active. So as much as it's as I said, it's difficult to predict the unusual activities and the outbursts. There are still a good dozen or so meteors showers throughout the year that remain relatively predictable and reliable year after year. So they typically produce the same zenith hourly rate year after year. Some years will be better than others, simply because the moon phase can really interfere, can really cause issues and change the quality of the meteor shower. So every year it's a little bit different based on the conditions that we have to deal with. So starting with the Lyrids, they peak on the night of 21st to 22nd, as well as the night following. The morning of the 23rd can be pretty decent as well. This is the dust produced by Comet Thatcher. So Chinese astronomers recorded the shower as far back as 687 BC. So this is actually one that has a good amount of data, considering that it's not one of the year's best showers. It's borderline between a minor and a major shower, but we actually have a lot of data. And we know that it's produced some outbursts in the past, and we have a pretty good idea of when the next one will happen. And it's unfortunately not until the distant future from now. So normally we get about 5 to 20 meteors per hour, year after year. So some years can be a little bit better than others. And as I said, strong outbursts has occurred of over 100 meters per hour, a handful of times. So they are relatively rare. And I believe the next one is predicted to occur in about 30 or 40 years, so a long time from now. So this year, the moon is about 3/4 full. So it will definitely interfere with the visibility on those nights. So my recommendation would be to watch as late as possible the night. So probably the last hour or so before dawn, when the moon does get lower in the sky towards the western horizon. And the Lyrid radiant is also nice and high up in the sky. So that will give you the best chance of seeing more of the activity. So then shortly after that, we have the Aquarius peak in early May. It's actually a fairly broad peak. So in a lot of literature, we often see May 5, May 6th. However, the Aquarius can often reach a plateau of high rates, reasonably high rates, for about a week or so, centered on May the 5th. So this is one of the 2 annual showers that's associated with Comet Halley, the other being the Orionids that are visible in October. So from Ottawa, this shower, as I mentioned, it's really just a late night event. The radiant rises at around 3 in the morning, and then we get an hour and a half or so before the sky becomes too bright. So this means that we never ever see a lot of meteors with this shower, not at 45 degrees latitude. But the thing that you can see with the shower that's really cool, and that I've seen a handful of times, is those long Earth grazers that seem to traverse half of the sky or 2/3 of the sky like a bullet. Like it starts in the east and then it just goes on and on and on all the way to the west. And we get to see those as the meteors hit the atmosphere horizontally with the low radiant. And this can be really great for photos as well. And then as the night finishes and the radiant starts to rise higher and higher, you notice less of those Earth grazers, more of the shorter path meteors. But in general, they start to get a little bit more numerous just as the sky brightens. So this here, just a small crescent moon, minor interference. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the later period of the week we'll have darker skies. We'll have a waning moon, so less interference as the days go by. So there is one model prediction that I can share with you. So the dust trails that were shed in the years 539 and 985 are expected to give an extra 5 to 10 meteors per hour above the background activity. And that would be on the mornings of May 4th and May 6th. So typically the Aquarius produce a zenith hourly rate of roughly 30 to 40 per hour. So possibly a few extra meteors, which might make it interesting. So now we're on to the Perseids. So this is going to be the most active, the most ideal shower of the year to view. And with good reason, the Perseids are the most popular of all the meteor showers. They are very, very well known by the public. They typically occur in the time of the year where people are out camping or they're at their cottage. So they're very accessible. You can see good numbers of these meteors as early as the evening hours, as soon as it gets dark. And then, of course, as the radiant rises higher during the night, those numbers will go up more and more. So for this year, we have minimal lunar interference. The moon will be setting as soon as the night will begin, basically. And both nights, both the 11th going into the 12th and the 12th going into the 13th, should be about equally good as the peak. The actual zenith hourly rate of the shower at maximum will be should be happening in the mid-afternoon on the 12th. It's a pretty broad peak, so which means that both nights should be quite equal for us here. And you can expect roughly between 30 and 60 Perseids per hour, depending on your sky quality. So I would certainly suggest for the best visibility of meteor showers is to find an area with a wide open sky, with minimal lights, and ideally take a drive an hour or so, even half an hour or 20 minutes away from the city, and that makes a big difference. So one thing that's kind of neat with the Perseids is that they do tend to produce more fireballs during the week leading up to the peak. So the Perseids are a massive, massive stream. They begin their activity in mid-July, and they go on right up until the third week of August. So the ramp up in July going into early August is quite gradual. And as we get into August, it starts to increase more and more. And you get to see the good chance if you're out observing with your telescope in the week leading up to the peak, that you will probably see a number of Perseids and probably a good number of bright ones too. And interestingly, the brightness of the meteors tends to drop after the peak. So there's a little bit of a mass sorting effect happening in the stream, where the larger dust particles seem to be ahead of the peak, and then we get the smaller dust after the night of maximum activity. And then the final shower, the big one, my personal favorite, as always, was the GeminiDS. And it's still considered to be the most active and the most dependable of the annual meteor showers. It has been gradually increasing every year, with currently with zenith hourly rate of about 140 to 150 at maximum. So it's a very rich shower. It's, in my opinion, it's even richer than the Perseids. The problem, the big issue is often the cold temperatures at this time of the year, and the weather can be an issue. So the broad peak for this year is should be right in the middle of our night on December 14th. So it does favor North America. The moon will be present, so this is going to be an issue, but I would say don't let the waxing gibbous moon deter you. The GeminiDS produce a lot of nice bright meteors, medium speed. They are quite easy to see, and the moon will be setting late at night. You'll get roughly about a 3-hour window from 3 in the morning until dawn, basically, where the moon will be completely absent from the sky. So during those conditions in a dark sky, it might be possible to see over 100 meters per hour. And if the night of maximum activity is clouded out, you can certainly try the night before. The night or two before will be producing half of the rates of the peak night. And the other bonus is that the moon will be setting earlier too, so about an hour early. So now I've jumped through a number of the other showers that, like the Leonids and the Orionids and So the reason I'm not going to be talking about those is that unfortunately, those are all going to be fighting strong moonlight this year, and observing them will be difficult and not very productive. So my attention would be to focus on the ones that are at least partially available in dark skies, or as in the case of the Perseids, are going to be really excellent. So unfortunately, moonlight, or in the case of strong moonlight, it does washes out all but the brightest meteors. So it makes a very, very big difference. So now we do have the possibility of unusual meteor activity in 2021. And I'll talk a little bit about this. So there are three sources that are potentially going to be interesting. Unfortunately, they are probably not going to be accessible from around Ottawa because of the timing, either because of daylight or because the radiant will be just below the horizon at the time of predicted activity. But as I said at the beginning of my talk, forecasting these obscure meteor showers and their potential outbursts is a very difficult thing to do. And there's a very good chance that those timings that I'll be showing could be wrong, or even the position of the radiant expected in the sky could be different than where they expected. So those are worth looking at or keeping note, simply because there can still be a good chance that you will see something, even if the predictions say otherwise. So in the case of the Eta Eridanids, this is actually an annual minor meteor shower that's active in August and into September. It's a long duration shower and typically produces only maybe between 3 and 5 meteors per hour at very best. Nothing to get very excited about. But I found I've been very impressed. As far as the minor obscure showers, this is one that keeps impressing me year after year for the past several years. Certainly not in quantity, but in their quality. And these tend to be long, bright meteors that are really impressive. There was one fireball one year I was set up at one of my favorite dark sky sites. And just as this radiant source, I knew where it was, and I was keeping an eye for those possible meteors, but I was keeping an eye, that source was just coming up over the horizon. And then I saw this massive earth grazer that cut across the zenith all the way from like easily a good 2/3 of the whole sky from end to end. And it was bright. It was about a -5. So these could be impressive meteors that sometimes will even overshadow the much, much more active Perseids at this time of the year. So the thing that's kind of interesting for this year is that the parent object, or the object that we believe is creating this shower stream, is C1852K1. I had to look up to see what this object was exactly, and I'll talk a little bit more later about it, which is there's some cool facts. But anyway, we'll be passing through the one revolution dust trail associated with this object. So basically, we know that this object has gone by at least once around the sun, and it's probably heading out and will never come back. But this dust trail should be encountering us right around midnight local time. So unfortunately, when I checked my planetarium program, it did show that the radiant would be just below the horizon. So if something does occur at this time, we're not going to be able to see it from Ottawa, because the radiant needs to be at least at the horizon or up to see anything or any sign of this activity. So if the timing is off by an hour or two, and the radiant is up, maybe we'll see something. There is no word, however, on what kind of rates we can expect at this time. It may actually be unknown. So the interesting thing about the object, the parent object of this shower, is that it's a hyperbolic comet. So it may have been ejected from the Oort Cloud due to a passing star, like a long, long time ago, or it originates from another star system. So when you're thinking about it and you observe the Eridanids during the summertime, those meteors may actually be interstellar. They might actually come from a different star system. So it's kind of neat when you think about it. So when I looked at this, and I figured, hey, no, there's some pretty cool facts about the Oort Cloud. This is the reservoir of comets, extending way past the planetary system, and this is where we believe all the comets are coming from, in the exception of possibly interstellar objects like the one I was just talking about. So some cool Oort Cloud facts. It's yet to be observed, but there's many pieces of evidence pointing to its existence. The comets come from all directions, and it's speculated that they have a short lifespan. So they either melt, collide, or they're influenced by gravity by other objects. So this is more evidence that they're coming from this sort of like massive reservoir at the edge of our solar system. Speculated to contain billions or even trillions of objects. And the Oort Cloud is believed to extend up to 1 light year, or around 10 trillion kilometers. So to put it in perspective, Voyager 1 spacecraft will reach the inner boundary of the Oort Cloud in about 300 years, and it will probably exit at the far side in 30,000 years. So this is just another graphic representation. So the astronomical units gives you a sense of the size of the Oort Cloud. So between the inner and outer boundary is equivalent to a quarter to a half the distance between the sun and the nearest neighboring star, Proxima Centauri. So now we'll go back to our possibly unusual meteor activity. So I said there was 2 other possible sources. We have the possible meteors from Comet Findlay. Several models are predicting outbursts in the order of up to 100 per hour associated with this comet that could occur at the end of September or at the beginning of October. Now, unfortunately, the radiant is going to be low enough to be a southern hemisphere event only, assuming that the radiant position is correct that they predict. So a little bit about the parent comet, Findlay. It reaches perihelion on July 13th, and the closest approach to the Earth on June 17th. And it will be visible from May through August, and may reach as much as magnitude 10 or more. And I've seen reports of past apparitions where its comet tends to produce a number of outbursts where it can get up to magnitude 8 or 9. So very, very easily within access of small instruments. And the last shower, the third one, the Origids that are active, normally active on September 1st or the days surrounding it. It's typically a weak annual or nearly absent annual shower. They were well known for a strong outburst in 2007. And this was predicted ahead of time by dust modeling. And in this case, they got it very correctly. They got it pretty much right on the time that they had predicted. And the models are again predicting a similar outburst this year on the evening of August 31st. Unfortunately, this timing, which a local time is right around dinner time, it's still daylight for the Ottawa area. So if it happens at this predicted time, we're not going to be able to see it, assuming the shower is as short of a duration as it was in 2007. If the activity does last longer, or if the timing is incorrect, maybe we might see something in the evening hours as this part of the sky starts to rise. So now I'm just going to give you a quick sneak peek into 2022. You might have heard me mention about the possible meteor storm next year. I just wanted to give you a quick update on this, or whether or not it will happen. So this is about Comet Schwarzmann-Watchman 3. And as you may know, this comet crumbled in 1995. It did a massive dust expulsion, And upon its following return in 2006, we had a really good show with this comet where we could see several pieces in the sky with our telescopes or photography. And so we know this comet went through a very, very big breakup. So what makes this interesting is that the model forecasts for meteors, they predict that we're going to be encountering the 1995 dust trail. So the very dust trail that may be very, very rich in dust particles from the breakup. It will be encountering the Earth on May 31st, right in the middle of the night for us here at a mist distance of only 0.0004 astronomical unit. So it's pretty much a direct hit. There's a but, though, a large but, that we don't yet have consensus between the meteor forecasts. So we have one group that, according to their modeling, they, for reasons that I don't know, is that they do not see the encounter with the 1995 dust trail in the models. They see some dust trails from other years that should produce very minor activity up to a level of about 10 meters per hour at the middle of the night, the same time, but nothing unusual beyond that. However, the Russian meteor forecaster, Mikhail Maslov, he maintains that his models show very clearly that the 95 dust trail where we could be passing right into it with rates of in the hundreds per hour, but may very well be as high as 10,000 or 100,000 per hour with high meteor brightness. So you're talking about a storm at the level of the Leonids in 1966, if that does happen. So hopefully in the next year or so, we'll have time for more updates and more refinements in the model forecast to get a better idea what we might expect. So the good news is that North America will be well positioned. So unlike the three possible unusual showers for this year, which are all not so well positioned for us, this one will be very well, even if the timing is off by an hour or two, either way, we're still going to have the radiant high in the sky night conditions and also moonless conditions to be able to see it. And just to give you a previous example of if this kind of a situation ever happened in the past, it did. If we look in the mid 1800s, comet 3D Biela, it broke up similarly into two big pieces. So when it came back, observers were able to see these two chunks, two comets side by side in the sky. And then on the following return, there was no comets. But instead, they had big meteor storms that were known as the Andromedids and produced on three separate occasions hourly rates reaching up to 15,000 per hour. So some of the largest meteor storms that we have on record were caused by this kind of a situation. So one can hope maybe we might be lucky next year and get this kind of a event. But whether or not it happens, there's, again, no guarantee with meteor science. And possibly we might see a few dozens meters per hour. But what I will do is definitely keep you up to date on any further developments. So stay tuned. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, Pierre, I've got two questions, both from Mick. Have you ever presented about the Live Meteors YouTube channel?
No, I haven't.
That? No.
I haven't yet. I should definitely check on that. But
okay.
Thank you for putting it out.
Okay, and then Mick, the second question was, and where is the radiant for the 73P potential storm?
Oh, good question. I did mention that the radiant, the shower is actually known as the Tau Herculids. It was historically they did see the shower. It does exist. They've seen it in the past in 1930, and was where we had the last significant outburst. And even though we call them the Herculids, the radiant would not actually be in Hercules this time around for 2022. It would actually be just above Bootes. So in this area of the sky, near the border of Bootes and Hercules, is where they expect the radiant to be located. So, and these meteors would be exceptionally slow moving, very, very slow meteors. And typically, one thing that can happen is they move so slowly that the gravity of the Earth will actually bend or slightly alter the path of the meteor as it plunges into the atmosphere, because there's just not enough of the orbital velocity. And this will give the effect of the radiant to actually shift a few degrees towards the zenith in the sky. So a little bit higher than what even the published radiant position will be.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre.
You're welcome.
So we'll move on to the next. I'll get you to stop sharing. There we go. And Chris is going to bring up his slides. I think we have an announcement about the International Astronomy Day, and that's over to Jim Thompson.
All right, thank you, Dave. So International Astronomy Day this year is scheduled for Saturday, May 15th. Unfortunately, there will not be an in-person event this year, but like was done last year, there will be an all-day virtual event co-hosted by RASC Ottawa Center and the OAOG. It will be run using the same Zoom webinar platform that we are using this evening. Last year's event was very successful, and preparations have already begun for another interesting program for this year. We have tentatively scheduled live solar observing and astronomy equipment demonstrations for the morning, science and astronomy talks for after lunch, and live lunar and deep sky observing for after supper. Registration for the webinar is now open. For the latest information on the event, you can go to the astrodayottawa.weebly.com website or the RASC Ottawa Facebook page. Next slide, please, Chris. So Astronomy Day is one of our biggest opportunities for public outreach throughout the year. For this year's event to be successful, we need volunteers who are willing to invest a little of their time. If you think you might be interested in helping out, please feel free to get in touch with me. There are many ways for people to get involved. We are looking for people to do short 10 to 15-minute demonstrations of their equipment or discussions on how they like to observe in the Ottawa area. We're also looking for people who are able to get a live view from their telescope up on their computer screen, which can then be streamed over the Zoom interface. A portion of our schedule is dedicated to prepared talks on astronomy or science in general, so we are looking for volunteers there too. Finally, there are a couple of somewhat behind the scenes roles that people can contribute. One is to sit as a subject matter expert on our rotating panel throughout the day, answering questions from the audience as they come in. Another role is that of webinar co-host. By trading off the duty of keeping the webinar running smoothly through the day, we can keep the effort of any single individual down to a reasonable level. If any of these roles sound like something you would like to participate in, please drop me a line at top-jimmy@rogers.com. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. So we're going to move into a 5-minute break, and we have our Messier and Moon Challenge on the next slide. And please don't leave. We've got Dr. Jayanne English with an amazing presentation right after the break. So hang in there for 5 minutes, a quick bio break, see if you can figure out what these images are. We'll see you in 5. Okay, folks, so welcome back from the break. And welcome, Dr. English. Let me just spotlight you here.
Thank you.
There we go. Let me remove my spotlight. There we go. So welcome to the RASC Ottawa Centre. Pleased to have you with us. I'm going to get Chris to stop his slideshow and then you can start yours.
Great. And I have the sun going down here in Winnipeg and it's just too lovely. So I'm not going to change my lighting.
Okay.
So you'll see the shadows happening on me. Great. Do I introduce myself?
Yes, if you can introduce yourself, that's probably best.
Okay. Let me see if this will. And do you see a galaxy?
Yep, I see your slides. Yep.
Great. Perfect. Okay, so I'm Professor Jayanne English at the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Manitoba. I have a background in visual arts. I went to the Ontario College of Art and Design University, as it's called now. Did my PhD in Australia at the Australian National University, and I worked for NASA at Space Telescope Science Institute. So that's in Baltimore, and I was on the Hubble Heritage team. And then I became a professor at the University of Manitoba. I am very honored to talk today to the Ottawa RASC because they have, they're one of 3 groups that have created the KELAC Award. So it's the RASC, the FAAQ, and the Canadian Astronomical Society, CASCA. And I was very honored to be a recipient of that award this year. So thank you for inviting me to talk to you. Okay, so today's talk is Cosmos and Cartography, mapping the magnetic fields in galaxies. And it's in the context of public outreach images. I want to make sure first that everybody can hear me well. Yes, good.
Yeah, you're clear.
Good. And so public outreach images are made initially for textbooks, magazines, and newspapers, but of course they're ubiquitous on the web now. And the International Astronomical Union asked research astronomers to become involved in public outreach. So the intention of the public outreach images was encapsulated in the statement by the Hubble Heritage team. By emphasizing compelling Hubble Space Telescope images distilled from scientific data, we hope to pique the curiosity about our astrophysical understanding of the universe we all inhabit. So the idea here is to build bridges between astronomers and society and to pique interest. So we don't want to present, we can't possibly present all knowledge about a particular object or a phenomenon, but we can pique people's interest and then they can go to the web and find out more about it. Originally, these images had been made by individuals like photographer David Malin at the Anglo-Australian Observatory, but in the 80s, it started to be made by teams of people. And I was on the Hubble Heritage team. We used to appropriate scientific data from the Hubble by other scientists and convert them into images while also communicating and involving the scientists in making those images. You can pick me out here. I'm the particularly short person. But I'm also a research astronomer. So I find myself in collaborations where I'm collecting data and analyzing data. And I can also make the images for this collaboration. And here's a radio telescope in Penticton, BC, called the Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory, and 2 of my collaborators there. So the public actually wants the images to be what we can call the Western image tradition of representation. They want them to be not manipulated at all, as if they were snapshots. They want them to be very detailed, naturalistic. They want them to mimic nature, be convincing and compelling. One definition is that these image tradition representations preserve the form of things as they occur in the world, and they can be used as proof of an entity, effect, or event. So I was on the team that made this image here. I actually made the image, and I was on the research team here, and these are interacting galaxies. What we're looking at here are some very small galaxies that are within the diameter of the Milky Way galaxy. That's kind of the volume scale here. And we can see that they're stars, of course, in galaxies, and we can see that there's some dust obscuring some areas. We see there's gas because the pink is glowing gas, it's ionized gas. And we can tell that there's dark matter because they wouldn't be interacting so strongly without dark matter. There wouldn't be tidal features like this tail, and the galaxies would not be merging together as they are. These galaxies will merge together to form one larger galaxy eventually. So this image representation is in the Western image tradition, but it is constructed out of data, and data is a totally different image tradition. It's from the logic image tradition, where the name comes from counting logic machines. So the definition for here is that they are counting rather than picturing machines that aggregate masses of data to make statistical arguments for the existence of a particle or effect. Now, a lot of you are taking images with charge-coupled device cameras, and each pixel of those is counting photons. And also, you might, like the research astronomer, be taking multiple exposures and then mathematically combining them together to make sure your signal is stronger than the noise. Also, of course, when we do analysis on the data sets, we use mathematics. But I think the best example of a large tradition image is the radio telescope image. Another feature of these images is that eventually pictures become surfaces on which quantitative information was deposited. Now, when you have a radio telescope that's an interferometer, you have antennas that are along a railway track, and you use the rotation of the Earth to synthesize a giant mirror. So you need to have the Earth rotating. In the first hour, it's not rotating, and in the second hour, it's rotated more. So what you'll see in this image is that you only need to do a half a rotation of the Earth. So in 12 hours, you will see the picture being deposited on the surface of the 2D picture plane. You'll also see an artifact where bright sources have rings around them due to the rotation of the Earth. And so over time, what you see is a supernova remnant in the center of this image. So it gets built up. And what we're doing is we're taking the signal from the telescopes and the distance between the telescopes antennas and converting them to position and intensity in the sky. So it's very mathematical. Now, as a research astronomer, the culture of science has a very strong impact, and we like contour plots. So you can see some contours here for the disk of the galaxy. And we're looking here at some vectors, these little lines that are showing us the direction of the magnetic field. And if the science is clear as in a plot like this, then the research astronomer feels that the image is very appealing, but the public doesn't find these very intriguing at all. So I encourage people to use techniques from visual art to create appealing versions of these data sets. And what we can do instead of contours is put in a Hubble Space Telescope image of the disk of the galaxy, and we can convert these vectors into flow lines. And I'll talk about that later. So let's consider how we collect the data and what kind of data we use. So we're looking at electromagnetic radiation because that's how we know about things in the universe. And at the very energetic end, we can consider light as a wave all the way through electromagnetic radiation. And at the energetic end, this wave has a very small distance between the peaks. And at the low energy end, it has a large distance between the peaks. And we call this the wavelength. The distance between the peaks is wavelength. And if we're looking at radio data, we often refer to frequency instead, because the speed of light, we know its value is equal to the wavelength times the frequency. So using frequency and wavelength are interchangeable. Now, let's say we're making a Hubble Space Telescope image to go in our outreach image. Then what we do is the electromagnetic radiation is coming towards the detector, and we want to use all the hardware in the detector to count photons and not to encode color. So we put filters in front of the detector, which select certain wavelength ranges. And for radio, what we have is a receiver, and the receiver, you can set different channels, so different frequency ranges. Now, for this example, I'm using Hubble Space Telescope image, and what you can see here are a couple of important things. One is that the Hubble sees outside the range of the human eye, which is covered by this wavelength range in here, and we're only sampling these small little bits of wavelength ranges in the visible. Then we have high energy short wavelength over here, and we have in the infrared, that was the ultraviolet. In the infrared, we have the lower energy, longer wavelengths. So now we have a series of black and white pictures, and we have to colorize them. Assigned color to them is what I mean by that. And when we do that and put them together, we then can see that the high energy range has ionized gas and young hot stars in a ring that surrounds the older stars, which are lower energy. Okay, we can also do this with radio data. Here I've listed, instead of saying filters, we say bands. So we have 4 different bands. And what we're looking at here is a galaxy that has a supermassive black hole in the center. And that black hole has jets that are emitted out the poles. And so this is called an active galactic nucleus. And here I have 4 images because the colors were assigned by 4 different people. So this brings us, and you see these very long jets here, and you can say, okay, well, how do you select colors when there are no colors here that the human eye sees? Because this is in the radio. And for that, then I suggest to people that we use visual grammar. And visual grammar includes the techniques of composition and color harmony. And this allows the person who's making the image to create spatial depth, richness in color and detail, which will engage the viewer. And sometimes you can even communicate some of the content without having a legend. And the important thing here is that you work with human perception, you work with human physiology, which makes an image more engaging to a human. And if you want to know how to do this sort of thing, you can Google me. So this is recorded, I see. So you can go to this slide in the recording and find that you Google Cosmos Canvas Jayanne portfolio, and you will get links to video tutorials, lectures, a really detailed article, and so on. Now, I want to prove to you that the physiology is important and plays a role every time we're looking at something. So I'm going to ask you all to stare at this yellow circle for 15 seconds without blinking. And then we're going to look at this ring over here, this little black ring. And I'll ask you what you see. So 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, 11,000, 12,000, 13,000, 14,000, 15,000. Look at this ring and tell me what color you see. Well, if we were in person, you'd be able to tell me what color you see. And that would be a purpley blue, okay? That's an after image. No Hogwarts house elf came up and painted it on your screen while you were staring at it. It's called a complementary color. And this is created by our eye-brain system. So we can make images that work with our eye-brain system instead of fighting with our eye-brain system by choosing complementary colors. Here's another illusion that our eye-brain system creates. These are circles that are the same size, but one of them, for most of you, is going to appear bigger or jump forward than the other. And you'll find that that's the red one. And the red one, when it approaches a viewer, artists call it warm. And a cool color that recedes from a viewer, artists call that cool. So we can use these when we are trying to create images for the public. So what are we trying to do when we create images like this of the disk of NGC 5775? We're trying to make image tradition representations that resonate with the scientific content existing in the logic tradition data images. And these are very complex data images. We're trying to make a representation that is clear to the public. And in this one, what you can see is that there are star-forming regions called ionized hydrogen regions where the gas is glowing pink. Hydrogen glows pink or red when it's heated by young stars. And I presume a lot of you have an H-alpha filter for taking images with. Okay, so you probably know then how the hydrogen gets ionized, how it cascades through different energy levels to create this rose-colored emission. What processes create radio continuum emission? Well, there's two processes, and one is called synchrotron radiation, and that's when a charged electron comes close to a magnetic field line. It will start to spiral around the magnetic field line. When it does that, it accelerates in the curve, and so it gives off a photon. For historic reasons, these photons are called cosmic rays. Another way to create emission is by thermal radiation, and it's got very many names. Now, this is when you have free electrons and protons, and they are oppositely charged, and therefore they attract. Now, the electron here isn't going to get captured by the proton and go into the orbit like it would for ionized hydrogen. Instead, it's just pulled towards it and it bends around it and keeps going. And when it does that, it also emits a cosmic ray. Now, if some of you are familiar with the black body curve for stars, you will know that the star is emitting at all wavelengths. But if it is a blue star, it's going to have more intensity in the blue wavelengths and less intensity in the red wavelengths. This is a similar plot for radio continuum. We see dust on the right-hand side here. The observations for this particular galaxy, a normal galaxy here, are the black line. Now, when you look at the radio wavelengths, you can see the two processes, the thermal process and the synchrotron process. And you can also make measurements by looking at different bands. I have two bands here. And for the thermal, you'll see that the intensity, which is on the y-axis, and on the horizontal axis, we have wavelength. So on the thermal line, you can see that the intensity is about the same regardless of what wavelength you're looking at. But if you have synchrotron emission, you have a slope and you have the intensity is higher in one band than in the other band. And you can make these measurements. Now this image here that I can tell you about it, it's an image for public outreach that has also been used in papers. And here we have, I've assigned the color. None of this you would see in the optical. So it's infrared and radio. It's done with the Canadian Galactic Plane Survey. So the lower energies have been colored red, and then also the radio emission has been colored green, and the dust from the infrared has been colored blue. And what you see here is that the round yellowish regions, that's where green and red are combined together, you have a supernova remnant. This supernova remnant at the top that's red is got less energy. It means it's older. And we have the blues having dust, and we have thermal emission all through the greens throughout this nebula here. And where the colors all blend together, they create white, and that means they're dusty regions with radio continuum. And those are the regions where, those are clouds where stars can be born. So we have both life and death of stars in this one image. Now there's also these little dots all around. Those aren't stars. Those are red, so it's radio continuum emission, and it's actually synchrotron emission. Now that means there's a magnetic field, and that means that these are unresolved jets from supermassive black holes in distant galaxies. So these are all active galactic nuclei galaxies that are these dots. Now I'd like to introduce you to the CHANG-ES project. And this was a project to study 35 galaxies in the radio regime. They all happen to be inclined to our line of sight edge on. And this is really the state-of-the-art survey. The principal investigator is Judith Irwin at Queen's University, and some of you might know her. And there's about 50 members in this consortium, and we're distributed around the globe. Here's the optical images of our galaxies with representation of the telescope we use, which is the VLA. And CHANG-ES stands for Continuum Halos in Nearby Galaxies and EVLA survey. So what do I mean by halo? So the halo we're talking about here is not the stellar or dark matter halo of a galaxy. Instead, it's kind of the atmosphere of gas, dust, cosmic rays, magnetic field components, and so on that are away from the plane or the disk of the galaxy. And we know that some of these components start to taper off after about a kiloparsec, which is about 3,300 light years. The radio halo is composed of radio continuum emission, and it's, we think, predominantly synchrotron, and we've been measuring that to confirm it. Now, the cosmic ray electrons and magnetic fields are moving above the disk in this radio continuum halo. Well, they go from the middle of the disk or the plane of the disk outwards and taper off to about twice the height of those other components. So how extended really are they? That we're measuring here where it tapers off, and we want to know really how far out they do extend and what their structure is. And how we go about that is we use the Very Large Array in New Mexico, which has gone through several name changes from extended, that's how we got E in our acronym, to Jansky's, and now it's back to Very Large Array, or just VLA. This is the radio telescope that's in the movie Contact. Now, when you move the antennas around on the railway track, you can have different spacings between them, and we call these configurations of the array. So we use 3 different configurations, and we also, I showed you a diagram where we have 2 bands, but we actually use 3 bands for these observations. And the antennas actually shadow each other when they're pointing at an object, and we have to fill in the data there. So what we do is we use radio single dish telescopes, and we have the data processed by some very exuberant graduate students. Now we've produced a catalog with, you go to the CHANG-ES website at Queen's, you can click on your favorite galaxy, and you'll get a number of panels of diagrams of the galaxy. And if you look at these ones here, this rendition of this is cartography here, so I'm going to show you kind of our mappings that we've developed for the CHANG-ES galaxies. We are showing here different one configuration in different bands in this image, and the highest resolution through to the lowest resolution of the data that we have. And that means we can start to compare features like this spur out here for the radio continuum halo with features in the disk, because we actually thought that the halo is dependent on star formation in the disk, because that's where the cosmic rays should come from. And we can say, are the features correlated with ionized hydrogen regions in the disk, or are they anti-correlated with, spatially anti-correlated with star-forming regions? Now, one of the things you can do is you can take all those galaxies, scale them to the same size, and try to increase your signal to noise by combining the radio halos of all of them. And that way you would see what a typical radio halo looks like, even if your telescope isn't sensitive enough to see it for every individual galaxy. So that's what was done here. And so this is the grayscale here is what a typical radio halo should look like around a galaxy. And this is NGC 5775 inserted into the data to show you the scale of the star forming region of the disk. The galaxy disk is larger, but this is the region where the stars are forming. So we call this, we used mathematically, we medianed them together. So we call this our median halo. And I'd like to show you another discovery that we had. As I mentioned, we thought that galaxies had a relationship between the star formation going on in their disk, how many stars were being formed. If there are a lot of them, it should have a more extended halo. So when we look at this particular galaxy, UGC 10288, it looks like it has a very extended halo, especially in the old observations. This is an unrelated galaxy in the background, but the rest looks like it has a large halo, but it doesn't have a lot of star formation going on. Now we could figure this out using contour plots like research astronomers like to do, but it takes a long time to discern what's going on in a contour plot. So for an explanatory image for the public, I put together non-radio data to show the disk in the galaxy of UGC 10288. And then what I did was we just looked at the highest resolutions, two data sets in the highest resolution for the radio. And look at this, you're beginning to see what's happening here. Do you recognize this from very early in this lecture? We have a very bright circle and then we have jets coming out. So there is an AGN. So it turns out when you put them together, we have a background galaxy with a central black hole in its jet, vertically perpendicular to the disk of this galaxy and almost dead center. This is just a coincidental alignment. The foreground galaxy is about 1 million light years distant from us, and the background galaxy is nearly 7 billion light years away. So we called this press release, "Nature Pulls a Fast One." We got fooled here. The galaxy does not have a very extended halo. And I'd like to point out that these images become part of our research as well. So this particular image was on the cover of a journal. So there's really a strong relationship between the public outreach images and the scientific figures in the end. Now we can take what we learned from making public outreach images and use that information to make color tables, for example, when we're making our other figures. And here's a color table. Remember, we looked at yellow and we saw purpley blue, and those were complementary colors. So I've used those complementary colors here. The steep region in this diagram has been the steepest that it can get is colored yellow, and the complement purple is for the thermal, very flat, the flattest it can be for this analysis of the spectrum. And that means that when we look at an image like this in the disk, generally we have, in other galaxies, we can check for steepening in the disk and prove that it's synchrotron radiation. But in UGC 10288, the galaxy itself does not have much emission, but that other background galaxy does. Now the jets, they have magnetic fields. So it's synchrotron radiation. And you can pick that out at a glance because it's this yellow through orange. And the AGN itself at the very center, we know that those have flat thermal spectrums. They're surrounded by dust, for example, but they have flat spectrums. And if you look really closely here, there's actually a purple dot in the center. So it means that you can look at these figures and at a glance, you could pick out the AGN, and we have discovered hidden AGN in our data sample. Okay, so let's talk more about the magnetic fields. So the radio continuum halo itself is a combination of electrons and the magnetic field. But with the radio telescope, we can actually find out more information about the magnetic field. So for example, when we have electromagnetic radiation, and you can all do this along with me, the electromagnetic radiation, when we think of it as a wave, it's got a wave in this direction and in that direction horizontally to it. So if I look at this, my finger going up, that's going to represent the magnetic part of the electromagnetic wave, and perpendicular to that is the electric part of the electromagnetic wave. And then my thumb is also perpendicular to the both of them, and that's the direction it travels in, right? Now, when we have it all oriented up like this, we can have a bunch of different electromagnetic waves, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so all aligned the same way. And those are we say that when they're all aligned like that, that the electromagnetic radiation is polarized, okay? And the polarization need not be all up in one direction. It doesn't all have to point north, but you can rotate your electromagnetic wave, and then you have a bunch of them pointed this way. Okay, so this finger here is now represented on the diagram by these little vectors. And that gives you the direction of the electromagnetic wave. I'll talk a bit more about this and how we take these electromagnetic waves, vectors, and we then take that and we convert it into streamlines using an algorithm called line integral convolution to produce an image like this one. And you can see they line up. And instead of using contours, we're using the disk of this galaxy from the Hubble Space Telescope image that Jelena Stein made, my colleague. And we can make images like this one. So we have the disk of the galaxy and we have the flow lines representing our vectors. So the direction of orientation, I just showed you that's called the polarization angle. And the length of that vector gives the amount of radiation with that orientation at that particular position. So that's giving you the polarization intensity, the strength of the polarization. The color is telling you the same thing. So if you look here where it's red, the vectors are longer. Okay, so it tells you the same thing. Now we can connect the vectors, and we're going to do this using a computer algorithm called line integral convolution. And the metaphor for this is that you are drawing lines in the sand. So if you took a stick and you do lines in the sand, well, what we do in the computer is we put down a random pattern, and we also use the polarized intensity to tell us where a signal is strong. And we then take the vectors and we draw the lines of the vectors so that they connect in that random background texture. Now, you can see that the horizontal filaments are much stronger in polarized intensity. So I decided to color those a different color than the ones that are vertical, so we can distinguish which ones have stronger polarized intensity from those that don't. But it's also because it's so bright, I can't put the galaxy in there and just add them together. You won't see the galaxy disk. Say I make the disk from the Hubble Space Telescope data. So I have to mask it out, and that's like putting my hand up to the sun right now so I could look at an airplane going by close to the sun. That's what I do. I just create a mask, and then I can insert my disk of my galaxy. And so my image looks like this for the filaments. And what I do is I take my HST, Hubble Space Telescope data with the radio continuum halo, and then I merge it together with the VLA polarization angle and polarized intensity data and create this image here. And that gives me the structure of the really interesting structure of the magnetic field. It's almost an X shape here. It's got spurs coming out. We can do something fancier too. We can look at if there's a gas between us. We've just looked at the rotation of the polarization angle on the sky, the rotation on the sky. But if the electromagnetic wave is coming towards you and passes through a packet of gas, that's going to cause it to rotate as well. And what we can tell is if it's rotating in this direction or if it's rotating in the opposite direction. And that's in this diagram from a paper. This is called Faraday rotation. And in the grayscale, it's in one direction. And if it's in color, it's in the other direction. This is a very confusing plot. So how do we represent this for the public? Well, remember I gave you this illusion here where we can have warm colors coming towards you and cool colors receding. My team decided that this warm color would be our approaching magnetic field direction, and this purpley blue color would be the receding direction. And so here in this image, we've done our line integral convolution. This was an earlier experiment than NGC 5775. And you can see we have these filaments here, but we also have blue where it's going away from us, where the magnetic field's going that way. And then we have green when it's coming towards us, and then blue when it's going away, and green when it's coming towards us again. And it goes green, blue, green, blue. Well, we've seen magnetic field reversals before like this in the disk of spiral galaxies, where the reversal happens between the arms. But we had never before seen it happen in the radio halo of a galaxy. So this is a big step forward, and it's helping us figure out what the origin of the magnetic fields might be. And it could be that this constrains the origin to be a dynamo. And you might be familiar with dynamos when you have a bicycle where you convert your pedaling to the light on this little headlamp that you have on your bicycle. That conversion of kinetic motion into energy is a dynamo. And so that's how we might be creating, the galaxies might be creating their magnetic fields. Where do we go from here? Well, where we go from here is we'll now be using the James Webb Space Telescope for our distant galaxies. And our VLA will still be used. Actually, Canadians made a big contribution to upgrading this telescope. But there's the Square Kilometer Array, which is going to be the biggest radio telescope project internationally and globally. And it's got two Pathfinder projects. One is Meerkat in South Africa, and one is ASCAP in Australia. And these are being commissioned, and we're getting data from them now. This is very exciting. So I'd like to take a few minutes to do a recap here of what I've talked about. Data consists of logic tradition representations, and I was showing you a focus on radio telescope data. And what we can do with these is attempt to make Western image tradition representations of our data so we can pique the public's interest and try to resonate the science, have the image resonate with the science. And that can make that very interesting for the public. We can also take what we've learned from making public outreach images and feed that back into making our other styles of images like figures for paper by using human perception also in our color tables. And the CHANG-ES maps that I showed you have different emission processes and polarization characteristics for 35 edge-on spiral galaxies. So we're learning about the magnetic fields and their origins. And that is allowing us now to make not just two-dimensional, but also three-dimensional maps of magnetic fields, which we now know extends several thousand light years away from the disk. And they can be rendered as striking image tradition representations using this algorithm called line integral convolution and techniques from visual arts and design. About the public outreach images themselves, I'd like to point out that they attempt to represent the science and not what the eye would see. We assign color to retain some scientific meaning or physical information, but for the citizen scientist, it can be used to emphasize your experience of collecting astronomical data and just simply viewing through telescopes. These images can provide insight to research and they feed back into our research publications, but they can also be used to describe the pleasure of hobby astronomy. So I encourage citizen scientists to explore visualization techniques. In the past, I had to fight for to get people, research astronomers, to understand that visualization was important. So I referred to it as a battle. And in the battle between the culture of science and the culture of art, both sides win when you make public outreach images. And that's it. I think I've finished in time.
Thank you very much. That was a fascinating talk there, Dr. English. Do we have any questions for her? Oh, yes, they're coming in now. Okay. Is there some kind of international guide to colorize in a standard way in astronomy photography of galaxies and gases?
Well, what we discovered on the Hubble Heritage team was that every object required its own color scheme. They're all individuals. So when we talk about optical imaging, some people try to assign colors based on what you would see with your eye. Now that's a whole other talk I give, and I prove to you you can't do that because then you will lose your information. For example, colors and temperatures and chemical elements, because the chemical elements, say sulfur and hydrogen, both are red. So you can't use red, or you just, for both of them, or you just wouldn't know that there was this other chemical element there. So each collection of data requires a different treatment, and many treatments are valid and appropriate for any single collection of data. So I'm showing you my color selections and Yelena's color selection for the magnetic field lines, but there would be other valid ones as well.
Okay, and then Michael Wolfson said, thank you very much. And he said, it's one thing to use these visualization techniques for human interpretation of data. What's happening though with the new kinds of artificial intelligence and machine learning to look for novel patterns? So
data mining, and there's various differences. It's kind of like saying, back in the day when we just said it was done by computer, and there's very many things that we do with computer. So when we say AI, it's very many different things, right? So if you're doing machine learning for data mining, etc., first of all, it's critical for machine learning, AI, that you have thousands and thousands of pictures of the same thing, and then it can go off and find the same object, right? So the quality of those training data sets is very important. Now, you're building up catalogs, and so I've been working with the VLA Sky Survey, VLAS, which is a new survey, and right now the imaging is just for scientists, and they're even becoming convinced that you have to be very careful. So instead of actually colorizing those data that are those objects that are being discovered by using machine learning to discovering them, and other techniques like functions that go through the data to data mine, we're using grayscale because the colors can mislead you, Rainbow color scales are really bad to use. They're very misleading. So we're exploring how to, for the research scientists and not for the public, how to show where the noise is versus where the signal is using color. And we've got some schemes being developed, but they haven't been implemented yet.
Okay, and final question here from Alan Dyer. Thank you. What is generating the magnetic fields in the galaxies, and what or where are the dynamos?
So yeah, okay, so this is all still ongoing research phase, right? So it's unknown. So first of all, you could have a universe which has magnetic fields distributed in the plasma, as it has large scale structure, and the large scale structure turns into, well, the little fluctuations become galaxies, which then become part of the large scale structure, the cosmic web of the universe. So the magnetic fields can be distributed throughout this whole thing, cosmological size magnetic fields. So that's one possibility for the origin. The other possibility is just the star forming gas disk where all the plasma is, right? So we have magnetic fields on the sun because we have charged particles in motion, rotating, right? The same thing, charged particles in the disk of the galaxy rotating can cause a current, which causes a magnetic field. So precisely what is happening there and how you get it up into the halo, this is something that people are really working on. Is it what causes the magnetic field lines to go up into the halo? There can be instabilities, there can be winds that drag them up because the electrons in the magnetic fields are really coupled together. And so this is just being explored now. So I think the person to ask here who's got some nice models about this is Judith Irwin's husband, Richard Henriksen. And we're planning to make an illustration by the summer that involves a beer glass in sequence.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming out and speaking to us tonight. And I got lots of positive feedback in the chat and in the Q&A box. So thank you again for coming out tonight.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Okay,
So
we're going. Oh, there we go. So I'll get Chris to bring up his slideshow. We're moving on to our observations, and first one up is Jim Thompson. Just give me a second here while I spotlight you. There we go. Oh, next slide, Chris. There we go.
Great. So my first image is of a very young crescent moon that I captured on March 15th. I call it a Cheshire moon, as at a first glance it reminds me of the similarly named cat from Alice in Wonderland. I find it somewhat difficult to recognize many of the common lunar features, such as Mare Crisium, which is just right of center, due to the unusual lighting. I don't often get an opportunity to observe the moon in detail at such a young phase, so this was a treat for me. The image was captured using my portable rig, a 6-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain on a Meade LX65 Alt-Az mount. I set it up in the parking lot of my workplace, since that location has a good view of the western horizon. I captured this image in support of the South Pole Mountain project that I've been working on with Paul Cloninger, which we'll hear more about tonight from Paul. This is a mosaic of 2 frames, each a stack of the best 200 out of 2,000 frames. I used an ASI 183 monochrome camera and Astronomic ProPlanet 642 filter to capture the images. So that's a infrared filter. Next image, please. So Friday of the same week was the beginning of a string of 4 clear nights with the moon positioned favorably for observing from my backyard. This image is a composite of the lunar images I was able to capture over the course of the 4 nights. Each moon image in this composite is itself a mosaic of 8 separate frames, which are in turn each a stack of the best 200 frames out of 3,000. The final images have been sized down for this composite, but each original is on the order of 5,000 by 8,000 pixels in size. All images were captured using my 10-inch Ritchie Chrétien at native f8 with the same ASI 183 monochrome camera and the same astronomic IR pass filter. The images that follow dive into each moon phase a little deeper. Note as I proceed how the seeing on each night affected the quality of the imaging. Next image, please. So the first detail shot is from 2 days before first quarter. I've selected a few areas of special interest along the terminator to show at a higher resolution, which in this case is at 1/2 of the full resolution because the seeing on this particular night was bad. The first grouping of craters on the left is a good example of the heavily pockmarked Southern Highlands. There are countless craters to explore in this area. The next inset is of the most prominent section of the Nectaris Basin, the Altai Scarp. Scattered along this impact basin rim are a number of large complex craters worth a closer examination if you get a chance, especially Theophilus, which is on the far right. I included the next inset because it illustrates nicely how the surface of the moon was gouged out by the impact that made the Imbrium Basin. The direction of these shadowy grooves aligns with the center of that impact feature. The final inset on the right is of another group of interesting large complex craters captured just at their sunrise. Next image, please. This next moon image is from a day before first quarter. There were many complex groupings of craters along the terminator this evening. I especially like the crater on a crater on a crater effect of Faraday, the rightmost crater in the left inset image. I was also fascinated by the cone-shaped shadows cast by the Caucasus Mountains toward the crater Cassini, seen in the rightmost inset. Finally, you can see more gouges in the terrain around crater Albategnius and Hipparchus that resulted from the Imbrium impact. Seeing on this evening, by the way, had improved to below average. Finally, I have also annotated some observing challenge features that are somewhat time sensitive. The so-called lunar L, E, X, and V. My timing was just right to catch all 4. Next image, please.
What are you doing, Maya?
The next image is for the night of the first quarter, where the moon is 1/2 lit from our perspective. I could easily do a whole talk just on the features observable during this phase, but I have elected to just highlight 5 of my favorites. Crater Meritus does not get a lot of attention from observers, but it is every bit as complex and interesting as Tycho or Copernicus. Next is Rupus Recta, or the straight wall. It is a strikingly straight feature, especially when the lighting is this low. The escarpment looks huge here, but it is actually only about 200 meters tall and 1 to 2 kilometers wide, so one could walk up it fairly easily. The Hyginus Rill is another favorite of mine and a bit of an observing challenge. You need really good seeing conditions to be able to make out the fact that the upper part of the rill is in fact a chain of pits formed from a collapsed lava tube or dike feature. Next is Archimedes, an interesting crater because of the flatness of its floor. See if you can find any small craters on that otherwise smooth surface. Finally, the Alpine Valley on the right is another observing challenge. Not the main valley itself, but the very small rill that runs down the middle. I managed to catch it on this evening along with the other observing challenges because the seeing conditions were above average on this night. Next image, please. My final detail image is from the day after first quarter. The seeing conditions on this night were the best of the 4 nights, a solid good. The conditions resulted in probably my best ever capture of the crater Clavius. It also allowed me to capture a few of the very small craters on the floor of crater Plato, which are a very difficult observing challenge. This phase also did a good job of presenting the RASC Lunar Observing Challenge for this month, crater Fra Mauro. This crater and its neighbors are ancient, heavily worn down craters with lots of debris from later impacts draped over top of them. The location of the Apollo 14 landing is noted here on the right side of the inset. Next image, please. So this is another view from around the crater Pluto on the same evening, or crater Plato, sorry, on the same evening, but with the image brightened a little bit. While I was examining my capture from this night up close, I found an odd feature seemingly floating above the lunar surface, well beyond the terminator. That's marked with the red arrow in the image. Next image, please, Chris. Looking at the various lunar maps I have, it appears that the odd feature aligns roughly with the position of the Laplace Promontory, a tall headland that marks the opening into Sinus Iridum. I was curious though, is it possible for the top of the promontory to be lit by the sun based on what we know about the geometry of this area? Well, let's find out. Next image, please. Comparing my image to various maps, I estimated the distance from the terminator to the feature at between 90 and 100 kilometers. I also went to the quickmap.lroc website to get the digital elevation model data for this part of the moon. From this data, I determined the top of the Laplace promontory is about 3 kilometers above the floor of the Mare Imbrium. I sketched up all of the pertinent geometrical data in CAD software, and lo and behold, yes, it appears that on the night in question, for that position of the terminator, the top of the Laplace promontory would indeed be lit by the sun. Mystery solved. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And next up, we have Richard Taylor. Just give me a second to spotlight you. There you go.
Good evening. So this first image is part of what seems to be becoming a long-term project with me about photographing the asteroid Vesta. We had a lovely sequence of clear nights in March, and Sky and Telescope magazine pointed out to me that Vesta was coming to opposition at the beginning of March. So I decided to try and get some pictures of how it's moving through the constellation Leo. So here we have a small segment of the constellation Leo near the Theta Leo star in the hind end of Leo. It's also called Chertan. And if you show the next picture, this is an animation, I hope. You should be able to see Vesta moving. I'm not seeing it. There we go. Okay, so a little spot of light hopping across, not evenly because we did have a few cloudy nights in there. But I'm hoping to keep on going with this into April. I've already started taking some more pictures of Vesta. It's going to be curling around Chertan and heading back east and south. So it should show some nice pictures with galaxies involved as well. So we'll see if we can have another episode of this animation for next month. Next picture. So while I had the telescope aimed at Leo, I also decided to collect a few galaxies. This one is known as the Leo Trio. It's got a set of 3 galaxies that are very prominent, very bright. The next picture shows them labeled. M65, M66, and NGC 3628, the Hamburger Galaxy. And of course, another photobomb by the NGC 3593 up in the top right corner. So there's 4 galaxies all in the same field of view here. This is with my William Optics Z73 telescope, which has a focal length of 430 millimeters. So it's got a fairly wide field of view. Next one, please. And a little bit farther westward, between Chertan and Regulus, there's another cluster of galaxies. This one I can see 5 or 6 galaxies all close together. The next picture has them labeled. M95, M96, M105, and a couple of NGCs, 3384 and 3389. Very nice cluster there, but this one's a bit fainter so that you can't see so much of the detail in the spiral galaxy arms. So then I headed over to the Big Dipper, next picture, and took a couple of showpieces there. This is M51, beautiful whirlpool galaxy with another one stuck on the side. I'm hoping to get a few more pictures of this one to try and get a bit more detail, but this is kind of small in the field of view of my telescope. Next one, please. And then on the other side of the Big Dipper's handle, there's M101, and I'm still working on this one as well. I had a lovely night at FLO just last night. It was very clear and beautifully warm at long last, so I was out there for quite a while taking more pictures of this galaxy. So we'll see if I can make an improved version for next month. Next one, please. And to say goodbye to winter, this is my best shot yet of the Flame and Horsehead Nebula in Orion. This one has been a really big challenge for me. I've never been able to get enough long exposure pictures until this winter. And again, I could do better, but I'm very happy with this one. The flame in particular is very, very detailed, the dark shadows across it. And you can definitely see the nice shape of the Horsehead Nebula beside it. Next one. On to the moon. My pictures of the moon will not be as good as Jim Thompson's. However, I was taking a picture trying to capture the Earth shine on the 15th of March. And when I processed the picture afterwards, I said, hey, there's a little bright spot really widely separated from the main crescent down at the South Pole. I'll bet that's the mountain that Paul Cleninger has been talking about in February. So I promptly emailed this image off to him and he said, oh yeah, you've spotted it. So there it is, that little bright spot, not very bright, but at least visible, but very, very widely separated from the crescent moon. So that's a kind of neat coincidence. Next one, please. Not as good as Jim's, but I'm learning still on how to get good quality, high resolution moon images. Again, a lot of it has to do with the seeing. It was very nice in March to have the moon so high overhead. And you really do have to take a lot of pictures and stack them up and select out the best ones. So there's Theophilus, which was a lunar challenge a few months ago. I didn't get Fra Mauro this month, I'm sorry. And the last one, but I did get all the letters. And in fact, I hadn't heard about the L and the E before. I highlighted the X and the V, but then when I posted it on the RASC group in Facebook, immediately other people were pointing, oh, you've also got the L and the E up there. Any other letters? I don't know of any other letters. So that was a nice coincidence, and I thought a pretty good view of the almost first quarter moon. And that's it for me tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. We'll move on to Jim Sophia.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Well, just a couple of weeks ago, we had some clear weather, and I took this image of M82, the cigar galaxy, off my balcony using the Celestron 8-inch Smith Cassegrain with the Evolution mount. I used an ultra high contrast filter to combat the city light pollution. This is a 2-minute exposure with live stacking during that time using the Malincam SkyRaider DS10C Tech camera. And this was followed by some light post-processing and cropping of the image. Next one, please. This next image is of the Whale Galaxy, NGC 4631 in the constellation Canes Venatici at a distance of 25 million light years from us. You can see the small elliptical companion galaxy above its core, NGC 4627. And like the previous image, I used a UHC filter. This is a 70-second exposure, a little over a minute, using the same equipment. Next one, please. I showed you this image of the Rosette Nebula in February, but now I've had a chance to rework the post-processing a bit, and I'm really pleased with the results. This is one of my favorite targets using a 80mm refractor at f5.9. I used the IDEAS MBX filter for this image, and this is a 2.5-minute exposure with live stacking during that time. Last one, please. This last one of Bode's Galaxy, M81, was captured, believe it or not, in June of 2019 at our CARP Star Party. Do you remember those days? Darker skies there than off my balcony. I was using an 8-inch Celestron with a Malincam camera and an Asus laptop for display. This is a stack of 13 22-second exposures, approximately 4.5 minutes of total exposure time. The image was later post-processed in Topaz Studio to get more detail on the structure of the spiral arms. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jim. We're going to move on to Calvin.
Thank you. So it's obviously galaxy season. And so, which means really, I guess we should maybe explain what galaxy season is. The night sky, if we look up at the night sky at this time of year, we're looking directly away from the plane of the Milky Way. So we're looking way off, we're able to look way off into the distance, into deep space. And if we, of course, in the contrary would be nebula season, where we're looking right in along the plane of the Milky Way, and we see all of the nebulae that are near our sort of neighbors. So this shot, you can see actually here, you see some of the kind of the problems that Bob was mentioning. I noticed, I thought that Bob had somehow accessed my hard drive and was showing all of my bad images there, but I guess he's got one similar to mine. I have other problems that Bob did not mention, so I mean, maybe I'll mention that here. So this actually image is a very wide, it's a very wide field of view. I'm using here the Roe Ackerman Schmidt astrograph, 8-inch with a full frame camera. So the field of view with that combination is 5.15 degrees by 3.45 degrees. So I'm able to have a very large field of view. This is actually slightly cropped because of the images are so big that I need a supercomputer to deal with them. And you see vignetting, you see other things. Actually, that camera, that telescope is not designed for a full frame camera. So, and I've learned that some of the problems you see are actually the focal plane is not quite flat. There's a bit of curvature from getting the backspacing right, and also there's a bit of tilt, which seems to be in the Roe Ackerman Schmidt astrograph. And I think if you don't have a full frame camera, it's actually so minimal you'd never notice it. but my kind of trying to cheat fate, I'm finding these other problems. So back to the image. So we have here a slightly cropped from my full frame camera, and a huge number of galaxies. There must be at least 100 galaxies if I look in in detail into the actual image. The full image would be 60 megapixels. So if I look in any little region of it, I see huge numbers of galaxies. So this is part of the Virgo cluster of galaxies, and we see here the Markarian chain towards the bottom. So now we'll just zoom in on a couple regions of this and take a look. So next one. So this is the M58, Messier 58, and the butterfly galaxies. So this is that same image, and I've just really cropped it. I think I've processed the cropped version here. So even with that full frame camera, the huge field of view, I'm able to sort of zoom in and get reasonable quality at this local level. It looks actually terrible on my screen right now. I see lots of lighting effects that should be smoothed out, which don't show up normally. So, but obviously I just didn't do a good job processing it. But it's interesting that I think that you see the Messier galaxy on the top, M58, and then the thing on the sort of lower left is called the butterfly galaxy. They're actually quite good quality. Next one. And again, we see here M90, M91, and a number of other galaxies. So this is, again, just a cropped region of that very large image that I started with. And I think there's one more. This is the Markarian chain is next. Yeah, so this is, these galaxies are, most of them are actually moving in sequence. They're actually connected in some way through gravitational attraction. And some of them, though, are just photobombing it. But there's a vast number of galaxies there, as you can imagine. You can see many more than the actual Markarian chain. But I think I'm quite happy with this image. And although, again, I see more background noise than I do in my normal when I view it. But anyway, that's the Markarian chain. So quite good, and it was just one small section of the bigger ones. So and now to the next image. So this is M101. We saw one earlier today, and I just wanted to show you what I can do with that same combination. So this is the RASA it's a very fast camera, 400 millimeter focal length, with a camera that has fairly small pixels, and very carefully really focusing in on one particular galaxy and one small field of view. So I probably even used a small part of the sensor to get this, and it is certainly more than 6 hours of data, and but that's M101, and that's sort of what I can do with that same rig. So I'm too lazy to change anything or get other I have a couple other telescopes, but I'm too lazy to bring them out. So just using this RASA and my camera, and getting working with that, but I'm very happy with this M101. I see very, very fine, tiny stars within the galactic spiral arms, and even the small galaxy to the lower right is quite impressive. I haven't seen very many images of the smaller galaxy that compete with this one, so I'm very pleased with this. And all of these images were done in March 2021. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Calvin. I'm going to turn it over to Andrea.
Hello, good evening. It is very much galaxy season, but while I was waiting for a galaxy one evening, I shot M1, which is Messier 1, the Crab Nebula. And it is a supernova remnant, so it is a remnant of an exploding star. All of this image and all of my images are shot with a hyperstar, which is a hyperstar lens at the front of the Celestron C11 telescope. So it's similar to a RASA configuration. These systems are very fast. They can take a lot of light in a short amount of time. And so this was on March 15th. It was a very, very beautiful night, very cold. And there were an awful lot of stars. So I thought about reducing the stars, but I quite liked all the pretty colorful stars. All of the images that are coming up were also all shot without a filter. I have like a basic UV IR cut filter, which just keeps the visible light. So there is not a lot of filtering happening. So this is why we see so many stars. I have seen people do narrowband hydrogen emission imaging of M1, and you get a lot of different detail, but I quite like the natural color that comes from not using a nebula filter. Next image, please. As Calvin indicated, it is galaxy season, and this is galaxy M94, and it is in the constellation Canis Venatici, also in the northern sky. I was quite surprised, actually, how very big and bright this galaxy was, so it was quite fun to image. With my Hyperstar, I use the ZWO 533 camera. It is a color camera, it is a cooled camera, and it has a square sensor, unlike a lot of the rectangular images you will see. That allows me to get in quite close with a lot of galaxies, so I have quite a narrow field of view. This galaxy has rings upon rings that surround it, and there's a central core that's quite blue, and there's an awful lot of detail. So this was a really, really interesting galaxy to look at. And I loved the presentation by Dr. English this evening, because trying to figure out how much color to put into your galaxies is always a challenge. They can be very difficult to process. Next image, please. Oh, this was not the one I expected, but this is a fun one. This is M51. It's the Whirlpool Galaxy. So as many of you know, these are actually two galaxies that are interacting and combining. It actually has a tremendous amount of color. As you can see, there's some blue, which would be the young, hot and bright stars, and there's some red from the nebula areas and some yellow from the core, which are the older stars. This was done with the Hyperstar. This was actually done over the Easter weekend, I believe. For the first time with the Hyperstar, I usually use 60-second exposures, because Hyperstar is so fast, it gets so much light that you can blow out your stars. But it was a calm night and there wasn't a lot of wind, so I went for 3-minute exposures. As a result of the 3-minute exposures, I found I had so much dust and tidal tails from this galaxy. You can see there's a tidal tail going up and there's one curling around. And when I first posted this at Easter on Instagram, people kept calling it the Easter Bunny because it looked a bit like a bunny. Next image, please. This was a galaxy I stumbled upon because I was looking on this website that I use called Telescopius. And it's a really neat website where you can put in your camera and your telescope and it'll give you the field of view. And I was looking around at galaxies and it suggested that I try this one, which is NGC 4725. It's in Coma Berenices. And I actually have a wider field of view, which I'm not sure why I didn't share, which shows a third galaxy sort of up into the corner. And as you can see, there's a little tiny companion galaxy. This was shot March 15th, and again, a very beautiful night. And I was quite pleased with how all the color came out. As Calvin can tell you, processing galaxies is very challenging because the sky has to be, you want it to be dark, but you don't want to also turn your galaxy into noise. So they can be very tricky. And again, this galaxy has a lot of the blue and the yellow, which is a combination of the newer, younger stars and the older yellow stars. Next, please. So this was actually a really another fun surprise because this is the Flaming Star Nebula, IC 405. And for many of you, you know the Tadpole Nebula. This nebula is right next door and they are a combination. And the red part of this nebula represents oxygen, I keep saying oxygen, hydrogen. It's emissions of hydrogen that are red. I've always done nebulas, image them with a nebula filter to enhance all the hydrogen. But this night, again, I was waiting for a galaxy to rise. So I took this image with just IR UV cut filter. So basically no nebula filter. And the blue color just came popping up. So the blue is a different kind of nebula. It's called a reflection nebula. It is a result of a blue, young, very bright star within the nebula that is lighting up and exciting the dust surrounding it, and it's giving that blue color. So that's what I love the most about this nebula, is it has both the red emission nebula and the blue reflection nebula. So it's very pretty, and often you don't see it because with a nebula filter, it's all red. Next.
I think that is it, Andrew.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Great images. Okay, we're going to go on to Rick Wagner.
Okay, I'll just turn my video off so the sound comes through. I have bandwidth problems. I'm going to present a miscellany of various things this evening. It's been a busy month, a lot of clear skies. Through about 10 days early to mid-March, Mars traversed between the Pleiades and the Hyades, and I wanted to get out and catch sort of a sequence of it doing so. And unfortunately, between clouds and family commitments and the trees that surround my place, I ended up with only 2 nights that I could actually get images, but this is the better of the 2. And I think it turned out quite well. You can see some of the trees in the bottom corners. Mars, and then to the left of it is Aldebaran, and you can see how well the colors match on those 2. The Pleiades showing quite a lot of nebulosity, and then the big bright V of the Hyades cluster. Then over to the left, there's NGC 1647 and 1746 open clusters, and some very interesting dark nebulae stretching across the top of the image that I was quite surprised to see how well they showed up. This is 4 2-minute exposures with a Canon 60DA at ISO 1600, 50 millimeter lens at f4, and just on a barn door tracker. Next. So while I was out there and Mars having started disappearing into the trees, I just tilted up a bit higher to shoot Auriga. And you can see in the center, the Flaming Star Nebula and the Tadpole Nebula. The open clusters M36, 37, and 38 are just above them. Again, lots of dark nebulae, open clusters, 1647, 1740, 1746 are down near the bottom. And so you can see that early in the month, at least, we weren't deep into galaxy season. The winter Milky Way was still available. Next, please. So this is a video. It was a particularly bright passage of the ISS. Maybe you can run it a couple of times, Chris. Hope it works. I was hoping to get a nice sort of, the stars and stuff in the background, but once, as the time approached, I realized the twilight was going to be way too bright. So I just set up with 2 cameras, 8 millimeter fisheye, and this was the 10 to 22 millimeter zoom. So the moon in the top, Sirius to the left, and a beautiful clear evening. So one of the last days that our dock was still frozen into the ice and still usable for photography. Next, please. So again, hanging on to non-galaxy season, This is the clusters M46 and M47 in Puppis. These I shot with my Sky 90 400 millimeter focal length f4.5 Apo refractor and the Canon 60DA. I have it set up just this winter, installed a Pierre and the Ioptron mount on a little cliff top overlooking the lake. So I have an exceptionally good southern horizon from there, and started shooting some pretty pictures quick before the Milky Way disappeared. M46 on the right, you can see is highlighted by a number of very bright bluish A-type stars. There's actually a total of about 500 stars in the cluster. To the left is M46 with much fainter stars. It's actually about 3 times as far away, also about 500 stars. And you can see on the north edge of it a little planetary nebula, and that's NGC 2438. And it's not at all difficult, 8-inch, 10-inch scope. You can quite easily see that. On the next image, next, please, thank you. You can see the planetary 2438 at the bottom, and almost dead center in the top and down maybe 10% from the edge. You can see a little faint purplish circle. And somebody pointed out to me that that's another planetary nebula, Minkowski 1-18 at 15th magnitude and about half an arc minute across. So that would be a little more challenging to look for. You probably need a 14 to 16 inch scope under pretty good conditions to see that one. But it's interesting that it shows up quite nicely in just a 90 millimeter refractor. This is a total of, let's see, 52 2-minute exposures with the Canon 60DA and the 90 millimeter refractor. Next, please. So continuing with open clusters, this is the Beehive M44, also known as Perseids. It's a big cluster, 1.5 degrees in diameter, magnitude 3.7, so it's quite easily visible to the naked eye, quite spectacular in binoculars or a small scope. About 600 million years old. This is one of the closest clusters to our solar system at about 180 light years. About 1,000 stars total in the cluster. And it's interesting that it has undergone what is called mass segregation. So the brighter, heavier stars, the blue ones that you can see, have concentrated themselves into the center of the cluster and spread out the smaller, fainter stars out around them. So then we get into galaxy season, and I'm getting tired of just doing photometry with the Boltwood 40 centimeter scope. So I've decided to dedicate an hour or so at the beginning of every evening to shooting some of the many galaxies. I have a problem that the camera on the telescope cannot be rotated. It has a very small guide chip, and so I'm quite restricted on which galaxies I can shoot, the ones that have an available guide star. So NGC 2903 is, you'll find it sort of in the jaws of Leo the Lion, just beneath its head. This is a set of 6 400-second unfiltered exposures. All the following galaxies are all 400-second subframes. And depending on conditions, the guiding, all the various problems Bob talked about, they vary in the total number of exposures. But this is a nice galaxy. It's about 12 by 5 arc minutes. Magnitude 9, quite nice in a telescope. Central starburst area, and then these spiral arms show up quite nicely. Next, please. NGC 3344, very nice dead on flat spiral face on with quite a bright star involved in it. Now all the stars, almost all the stars that you see in this frame, of course, are in our galaxy. But it's a nice little object, 7 arc minutes across, 10.5 magnitude. And this is a set of 4 400-second exposures. Next, please. Well, one of the big events that I noticed for March was that Vesta was actually going to pass over the galaxy NGC 3501. That's the edge on spiral you can see there. And NGC 3507 is the face on spiral down to the left. I thought this would be very photogenic, so I advertised it to a bunch of people in the Kingston group. And a number of us took pictures. I took these pictures the night before I thought was going to be the big event. So I did some test exposures. Again, a couple of them, the guiding failed. So the bright object in the lower right is Vesta at magnitude 6.2, 6.3. And the only evidence you can see that it's moving is the diffraction spikes are doubled in one direction. And it turns out that the predictions from Earth-centered universe were incorrect. So by the next night, when I went out to image it, it was already out of the field of view. So that was the end of that. But so this is just 2 400-second exposures. Next, please. Final object, I think this is the 4th time now we've seen NGC 4631, the Whale Nebula. You can see, I mean, it's standing on its tail in this case, but it is shaped quite a lot like a sperm whale. The reason I shot this at this particular time is there is a supernova in there, but it's so faint and so hard to distinguish from the knots of dust and gas and starburst and everything that it's very hard to see. The little elliptical, dwarf elliptical next to it, you can see how it's quite dramatically twisted as it's interacting with the larger galaxy. And some of you may know NGC 4656 and 57 are just about a degree away, I guess. That's the hockey stick galaxy, which is also in related motion with this galaxy. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. I'm going to turn it over to Paul Cloninger. I'm putting his picture up because if he turns his video on, he'll be breaking up.
Thank you, Dave. My volume good?
Your volume's good.
Awesome. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Well, 'tis the season for galaxies for sure, but also for the zodiacal light. This phenomenon is usually best seen in the Northern Hemisphere around the time of the equinoxes in March and September. It's a faint, diffuse whitish glow that appears in twilight a few hours after sunset and in a dark sky. It extends from the sun's direction after it's set and along the zodiac, and then straddles the ecliptic. The light is caused by sunlight being scattered by interplanetary dust. The glow is very faint, so you typically require a very clear moonless evening under a dark sky to see it. It was actually very obvious on this night, just visually, and the camera had no problem recording it. I took this image with a Canon 70D and a 16mm f2 lens on March 14th, and it's a 15-second untracked exposure at ISO 3200. It was actually, I think it's probably the brightest I've ever seen the zodiacal light. All right, next one, please, Chris. So March proved to be a much more cooperative month than either January or February in terms of allowing me to further investigate the lunar mountains that I've been studying. I was able to take images on a number of nights, as Jim pointed out as well, to help pin down some definitive information on these mountains, but also to stop along the way and visit a few favorite areas of mine. I'm only showing one of these favorites tonight, since I want to focus on the mountains themselves. And this is one of my actually all-time favorite areas on the moon, the Apennines Mountains region. on the eastern shore of Palus Putridinus. I love that name, or in English, the Marsh of Decay. These are a rugged range of mountains towering up to 17,700 feet in elevation, or 5,400 meters. And they offer a chance to observe some fascinating topography, even with a small telescope. Next one, please, Chris. This entire image out to the large crater Archimedes is covered in complex systems of rills, isolated mountain peaks, and patches of highland terrain surrounded by smoother and younger floodplains. But there is one area in particular that's caught the imagination of lunar observers for the last 50 years, and it lies up near the northern end of the Apennines Range. It's the intriguing little bay that became the Apollo 15 landing site back in 1971. Next one, please. So I took this image with my 11-inch Edge HD operating at f20 with a 2-time Barlow and using an XImage 5 camera. I couldn't resist this target as a real-world follow-up to Jim Thompson's excellent 3D rendition that he presented last month. The seeing wasn't the greatest for me this night when I took this, but as with many intricate lunar features, you don't have a lot of leeway as to when you can observe or image a particular area. So this high resolution view actually looks a little bit on the fuzzy side. And again, that was mostly due to the seeing. I captured this view on March 21st. And one day either before or after this would have changed the shadows enough to either totally obscure the features here or wash out the contrast needed to see the details. Next one, please. So the details I'm interested in was the kilometer-wide rill that was the prime objective of the Apollo 15 mission. The rill is believed to be a collapsed latitude that snakes through the hilly terrain for about 130 kilometers. It has an average depth of about 300 meters and is just over a kilometer wide near the Apollo 15 landing site. The astronauts actually drove up to the edge of the rill and collected samples both there and around other areas in the bay during their 18.5-hour exploration of this area. So I was pleased to get this. Would have preferred a more stable night, but it's actually one of the better times that I've been able to capture this this very delicate rill feature. Next one, please. But as I mentioned, my prime objective of investigation in March continued to be the lunar South Polar Mountains that first got me hooked back in December. And Jim, it's really comforting for me to see that you're hooked on calculating mountains in the shadows poking up and reflecting sunlight. Makes me feel not quite so odd when I do that. I know of at least a few of you that got a chance to see these mountains for yourselves last month. And for those who didn't, I have a few images to show you. I also understand now why I have never noticed these mountains in quite this way before. And so tonight, I'd like to share a bit of a final summary on these based on my observations. As I've shown you previously, this was my first image from December the 17th when I first noticed this very bright knot of isolated light near the moon's south pole, quite noticeably removed from the cusp of the illuminated crescent. This image was only taken with a 70mm lens, and so this is quite an enlargement. And it was quite overexposed in order to capture the earth shine. All my subsequent images were taken at much longer focal lengths for a better and more detailed look. For the purpose of my summary that I'm offering you tonight, note the libration in latitude of just under +6 degrees and the age of the lunar phase at 3.27 days. These are a couple of bits of information that I want you to sort of keep in mind as I show you the other images. Next one, please. There we go. So January was a total washout investigating the moon at the critical time, and so I had to wait until February for my next look. But even then, the primary date of interest on February the 14th was almost completely overcast, except for a brief murky sucker hole that opened up just before the moon set. Still, it was long enough to grab an image at 600mm focal length and capture a knot of south polar light. Note that the age of the waxing moon was virtually identical to December the 17th at 3.26 days. However, the libration in latitude was almost a degree further north, meaning that the face of the moon was tilted towards us in such a way that features around the South Pole were actually pushed back around towards the far side from our point of view. Could this explain why the mountain was nowhere near as bright as it was back in December? Or was that just due to the murky sky that I had to work with that night? Next one, please. So to understand what's going on here, have a look at this chart. At the top is Jim Thompson's simulation of what the South Polar region looked like on December the 17th. Last month, Jim and I detailed how we generated some of these views, and how he generated this view at the top based on lunar reconnaissance orbiter data to give an accurate representation of what we could expect to see at any given date and time. His view shows the view as seen from our location on Earth. To his simulation, I added the lunar reconnaissance orbiter topographic map as seen directly above the moon's south pole. It shows the elevation in a color code ranging from very low in purple to the lunar median in blue, and progressively higher regions from green through yellow, and then finally to brown. The large brown area near the center is the Leibniz Beta Massif, and the smaller brown formation to its left is the Malapert Massif. These are two of the highest mountains on the moon, and they're the source of the bright knots of light that we've been talking about. The other two things to note on this chart are the line marked terminator and the one labeled rim. The rim line is the edge of the lunar disk as we see it from here, from Earth, and so delineates the near side from the far side on this particular night from our point of view. Anything below the rim line is on the far side, and so technically not visible to us. However, both the mountain massifs are tall enough here to poke up above the rim and actually reflect sunlight streaming in from over the far side. The terminator line delineates the lit from the unlit portion of the moon on this night. Areas below the line are being illuminated and those above are not. The sunlight arrow indicates the direction that the sun's illumination is striking the moon. Okay, fair enough. This was the situation on December the 17th. Notice how these lines change as we flip to February the 14th. Next slide, please, Chris. So even though the age of this cycle and the terminator's co-longitude were almost identical to December 17th, the rim line is almost a full degree further north on this date due to libration. This places both the mountain massifs further behind on the far side, allowing less of their peaks to poke over the rim to be visible from Earth. So the degree of libration and latitude certainly appears to be one of the important factors determining just how bright these mountains will appear to us from here on Earth on the crucial dates. But what are those crucial dates? Fortunately, the clear skies of March have helped me to pin that factor down. Next one, please. I was hoping to capture images of the moon on consecutive nights right after its new moon phase to answer that question. And on March 14th, I lucked out with a very clear sky. This image is the youngest phase of the moon I've ever photographed, coming only 38 hours after the time of the new moon. Being so close to the sun, though, made it challenging to even see the slender crescent until after sundown. But that also meant the moon would be very close to the horizon. For this shot, I waited as long as possible to let the sun get as far below the horizon as it could before the moon would also set. So here the moon is only about 2 degrees above the horizon, and you can see that the sky is still quite bright. I didn't see any signs of the lunar mountains through the binoculars on this date, nor did the camera pick up any trace. Next one, please. So at only 1.57 days into its new cycle, this was a useful data point. I've taken that image and reoriented and boosted its brightness here in order to properly compare it with the next images on the following 2 days. Before I flip to those, however, notice that the libration in latitude again is near 6 degrees north, meaning that we're seeing slightly over the top of the lunar North Pole. And even though we have a very slender crescent here, notice that it's illuminated right to the top, to the north, whereas its lower cusp falls very short of the lunar South Pole. That's libration for you. Next one, please. At last month's meeting, I suggested that March 15th and 16th would be the most likely dates to observe the South Polar Mountains under conditions similar to December the 17th. The moon cooperated on March 15th, presenting an isolated view of the Leibniz Beta Massif, right near the South Pole, as you can see here. It's the southernmost point of that light. The camera caught this quite well, but the mountain's brightness in the image and through the binoculars was nowhere near as prominent as it was back in on December the 17th. In fact, I could just barely make out the mountain in the 15x7 binos. So why the difference? The following night helped to answer that. Next one, please. The view on March 16th turned out to be stunning. The Leibniz Beta Massif glowed like a pearl, and it was very prominent in binoculars. And unlike the previous evening, the Malapert Massif was also illuminated and easily seen in the binoculars, just to the left of its larger neighbor. What a difference a day makes. And therein is the other main factor determining the visibility, or lack thereof, of these two South Polar Mountains. The moon's motion is complex and changes its appearance substantially from night to night. Next one, please. So I asked Jim to render his simulations for the 3 nights I just showed you on my images, and then I added the LRO topographic projections again to show just how much the parameters changed in the span of the 49 and a half hours separating those 3 images. I'm going to flip through these fairly quickly to illustrate the changes, and Jim's simulations track quite well with the actual images. Interestingly, his simulation of the very young crescent on March 14th showed the possibility that the 2 massifs might have just been barely visible. But given the moon's very low elevation and the relatively bright sky when I photographed it, I actually didn't see any signs of them, either visually or in the images. Note especially how the rim line in this rendition moves downward towards the south in the next 2 slides. Again, this is due to the moon's changing libration in latitude. Next one, please. So there's March 15th. You can see that here that the upper or northern face of the Malapert Massif is now above the rim line. I'm sorry, the Leibniz Beta Massif is now above the rim line. But since the sunlight is coming from the south, it's not illuminated. Only a bit of its eastern flank is lit. And this tracks with both Jim's simulation and the image that I obtained on the 15th. Note also how the cusp of the lit crescent is approaching the mountain in Jim's simulation. Next one, please. The situation takes a big leap on the following night, with the cusp of the crescent nearly reaching the Leibniz Beta Massif. I think if it wasn't for the very deep Scott crater just to the right or the east of the Massif, the cusp would have appeared even more prominently lit and closer to the mountain. Note also how the rim line has progressed even further south, putting much of the Beta Massif right on the rim and the smaller Malapert Massif very close to it. That closeness to the rim easily allowed a substantial portion of the Malapert Massif to rise above the moon's rim and reflect a good deal of the sunlight striking its eastern flank towards us. As I mentioned, both of these mountains were very visible in the binoculars that evening, more so in fact than they were on December the 17th. Next one, please. So in this summary slide, I've arranged these zoomed in views from the 4 nights I was able to catch the lunar mountains in order from the youngest face at the top to the oldest at the bottom. All of these views had a fairly high amount of northern latitude libration, meaning the south polar region was actually tilted away from us. The amount of longitudinal libration varied a lot between these images, but in the polar regions, its effect is more in changing the angle at which the sunlight strikes the mountains rather than the amount of that sunlight. And in all of these views, the Leibniz Beta Massif is the brightest knot of light at the most southerly point of the lunar rim. So at the top on March 15th, the moon was only 2.5 days past new, and the terminator is at 298 degrees lunar longitude. You can see that the Leibniz Beta Massif illuminated as it pokes up over the rim, and one other bright mountain very close to the cusp of the crescent. If you look closely, you can see several other mountains on the rim, but you can only see these because of Earth shine. They're not bouncing light off from the backside. The next image down was from February the 14th. Oh, sorry, Chris, no. Yeah, just the next image in the sequence, that's right. The next image was from February the 14th when the moon was 3.26 days old. This is an interesting one because if you compare it to the next one down, my original image from December 17th, you can see that the time since the new moon was virtually identical for these two, and the longitude of the terminator was also very close. Now, admittedly, the conditions for imaging were very different on those two nights, with February 14th being taken with a 600 millimeter lens under a murky sky versus December the 17th when the sky was much more clear, but the image is fuzzy since it was enlarged from a shot taken with only a 70 millimeter lens. But the most notable difference between these is that on February the 14th, the moon's southern polar region was tilted almost a full degrees further around the far side, meaning less of the Leibniz beta peak was able to poke up over the rim to reflect sunlight towards us. That accounts for it not being as bright. This difference between the two nights was actually more apparent when viewing the moon visually. The Leibniz beta massive was very obvious in binoculars on December the 17th, but not at all visible on February the 14th. The last frame at the bottom was from March 16th, and the moon was 3.64 days old. This was the date with the most prominent appearance of the mountains, especially when observing it visually. While the Leibniz beta massive appeared closer to the cusp of the crescent than on December 17th, that meant it was closer to the terminator and therefore more fully illuminated. It really was quite stunning visually that night. So from all of this, we can see that the spread in time since the new moon only varied from 2.6 to about 3.6 days. In other words, only about a 24-hour difference. Any earlier than this 2.6 days, such as my image on March 14th, with the moon only 1.6 days past new, nothing of the mountains is visible. Anything much later than the 3.6 days of March 16th, and the cusp of the crescent begins to touch the Leibniz beta massive directly. So the bottom line is that if we want to see the two prominent mountains very brightly and distinctly separated from the crescent, we must observe them either on the second or preferably the third night after a new moon. But since the moon is still relatively close to the sun at this stage in its phase, that means it'll only be visible at low elevations under a somewhat dark sky for a couple of hours after sunset on each of those nights. Like many specific lunar features such as Hadley's Rill, the lunar X, and so forth, the optimum observing window only occurs on one night and for a short time on each month. But these mountains have one added complication in trying to see them distinctly separated from the crescent, and that is the libration factor. As I mentioned, all of these views had a fairly high degree of northern latitude libration at that point in their monthly phase, but that isn't always the case. Next one, please. So perhaps I should present this summary after pinning down this last factor, but who knows if we're going to get clear skies, so I decided to do it tonight. This is the situation where there is very little northern latitudinal libration, and it actually gets worse to points where you get a high degree of southern lunar libration present at the critical dates. This first opportunity to observe this occurs next week, especially specifically on April the 15th. You can see that the visible rim of the moon will actually be much farther south than any of the previous images, placing both the Leibniz beta and the Malapert massives well over onto the near side from our point of view. Jim's simulation for that date shows that the cusp of the crescent will be quite close to the Leibniz beta massive, and so it may not appear distinctly separated from the cusp at all on that date. Interestingly, the Malapert massive appears to be hardly visible at all on that date. Though I didn't show a slide for the previous night on April the 14th, Jim did run a simulation for me on that date as well, and it showed even lesser visibility of both mountains. I hope to image the moon on both of those nights to put this last piece of data into place. However, current weather forecast models don't look too promising at this time. Fingers crossed. Okay, last slide, please. So if it turns out that a high degree of northern latitude libration is necessary to see the mountains separately like this, then it may actually only currently be possible during the winter months to see them. I ran the numbers for the new moon plus 3 days for the next 12 months, and only in November does the amount of northern latitudinal libration again start to approach what it was back in December of last year. This situation is due to the tilt of the moon's orbit and the current orientation of its nodes, and it slowly changes over time. The bottom line, this lunar feature may only be highly visible on 4 or 5 nights of the entire year, and only for a couple of hours on any of those nights. So I guess I finally have my answer as to why I had never noticed this rather striking feature before. As I say, fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. Stay safe, everybody, and clear skies to all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm going to turn it over to our other resident lunatic, Brian McCullough.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, Chris. Just before we get started here, Paul, this is a book you probably recognize the title. It's called To Rule the Night, and this is was written with by James Irwin, one of the Apollo 15 lunar landers. And
yes, I've seen that.
Yeah, I bought this at the book market many years ago, and I discovered that on the inside, it was autographed to May and Jim Morrison for Christmas 1973 by Jim Irwin.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So for various reasons, not related to COVID over the past year, I haven't really been able to get out and do any type of observing really. And I think I did a presentation earlier this year or at the end of last year about having taken down my backyard observatory. So I'm moving on to a different phase of my enjoyment of the hobby of astronomy. So I'm working with mainly with an 80 millimeter telescope, just on a small alt azimuth mount there, and I've got another small Schmidt cat that I'm getting rigged up to get a proper mount. So just a more portable version of observing for me these days. So I was out in the backyard and I took a picture. That's a picture of the moon. And if we go to the next one, please, Chris. Right. So there's Mars and there's Aldebaran in the view. And so it's just an enjoyable night there. I wasn't staying out too long. We'll go to the next one, please. This is on March 20th, by the way. And if you can pick that out, all right, so there's the moon is the brightest object in there. You might be able to pick out a few stars and things. Of course, what I did was all I did was take a picture with my cell phone, just holding up to the sky and click and hope for the best, just for my own amusement. And then I came in and of course I did some high level filter processing here, which means I just opened up my image viewer and clicked around until I could find something where I could actually see my stars. We'll go to the next one, please, Chris. Thank you. All right, so up at the top, the top horn, one of the top horns of the bull of Taurus. So, and then we can see Mars as the interloper in this circle of stars. But now if we go to the last image. So back to this, Paul. Now, I understand that the International Astronomical Union, I believe, is going to be renaming those southern features as PK's Peaks. All right, so I hope that works for you. So what
oh, definitely.
So what I've done is I was out on the night. I knew when Paul had mentioned that it would be on the 15th that would be the main night for observing these peaks. So I went out and had a look through the 80 millimeter scope. So the top photograph there is Paul's that you saw just a minute ago, and the bottom one is my image of the cell phone right through the eyepiece of the telescope. So my image, Paul's, they're not oriented exactly the same way, nor are the two rough sketches I just made at the time. So on the left is the 7:10 p.m. sketch, and you can see there's just I've marked sort of the southern lunar limb and one bright point alpha. So then 40 minutes later, I was getting something in my just in the corner of my eye. So I was using averted vision. And at 7:50 p.m., as you see over the sketch on the right, I was now picking up the second feature that I just called beta. And it was, and we can see them in my image down below there, or maybe you can, but they're much clearer in Paul's. But I was quite pleased to be able to be looking for something like that. And I think what was even more exciting about all this was that Paul was bringing the rest of the club on this journey with him. And the stuff that Jim Thompson was putting into all this is just brilliant. I think the whole set of observations has just been a really thrilling observational event. So thank you for that. And Paul, just in honor of you, I think we can just leave you with the last slide here. And thank you very much, everybody. So best wishes for your recovery from your surgery there, Paul.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Good one, thank you. Okay, folks, so we're just moving on quickly just to wrap things up. We have our observing challenges from last month, and let's move on to the challenges for this month. The beginner challenge is Messier 96 in Leo. Our intermediate challenge, or sorry, our advanced challenge is also in Leo, Dwarf Galaxy in Leo. Our lunar challenge is Crater Reinhold. And all of these will be in our Astronotes and will also be on our website. So there's a summary of what our challenges are. I think we missed a slide for the intermediate challenge, but that was NGC 3389. There it is. Okay. Thank you. Next slide. Okay, the Fred Lawson Observatory is open. Even during these lockdown times, a limit of 5 people on the site outdoors. Please coordinate by sending an email out to our distribution list if you are going, and so that we can ensure we comply with the current provincial regulations. These are the folks that keep our club running here. We had an audience of 132, and thank you to all the organizers and speakers for this evening's meeting, and thank you to the RASC National Office for the use of their Zoom webinar account. If you have any ideas for speakers, or if you'd like to make a presentation, please email myself, meetingchair@ottawa.rasc.ca. I'd be happy to hear them. Again, if you wish to join the RASC, the cost for regular membership is $88. Family membership is $82.50 plus $15 per adult, $8.10 per youth. And there is a youth membership for under 21 years, $53. What are the benefits of those membership? Well, we have the Ted Bean Telescope Loan Library. We have the Fred Lawson Observatory, which is out near Elmont. Once we get back into the museum, we'll have the Stan Mott Book Library. Currently, we do not have access to that. As well, every second month, you'll be getting the Sky News magazine, and every second month, I made a mistake last month, I said it came out every month, but it's every second month, the journal comes out in electronic form, but you can optionally pay a little bit more and get a hard copy. The Amazing Observer's Handbook comes out at the end of each calendar year, and we have our local newsletter, Astronotes by Gordon Webster. Next meeting is May the 7th at 7:30 p.m. And again, any ideas, please send them to me, meetingchair@ottawa.rasc.ca. So thank you very much, folks, for coming out. Sorry we ran a little bit late tonight, but we had some excellent observations there. So stay safe. We'll see you next month. Good night.